Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto has lost everything and just wants to end it. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. A certain blonde rubbed a tired hand across his face, further rubbing in the smudges of dirt, grime, and sweat into his face. After a few moments of silence, the woman beside him collapsed in bitter sobs, and he gave someone he had once called a friend one final glance before zipping the black bag over his pale face. He didn't pause to comfort the crying woman on the floor for more than one reason, but the main one was that he was to show no weakness, no emotions, nothing. And he was good at it. The sobs of the forlorn woman echoed out and down the hallway, following the blonde out of the makeshift morgue that used to be a basement of one of the larger buildings where the old Uchiha compound used to be. In another building, small and inconspicuous amid the ruins of old manors and houses, a small girl with her dark hair pulled from her face with a white ribbon ran out from a door that teetered on the edge of falling off, and rocketed herself into the blonde's legs. He smiled, his eyes warming up for this person and this person only. The girl unfurled her fist from his dirty pants and grinned toothily up at him. Her two front teeth were missing and her dress was in tatters. "Papa! Welcome home!" Naruto flashed a foxy grin at his daughter, hefting her up and swinging her around once or twice before embracing her. The girl squealed with laughter and tangled her fingers in her father's hair. This was their Naruto's done his work for the day ritual that they had kept up every day that he was able to come home for the night. Placing his daughter down, he glanced up at the woman watching them. He put his goofy smile on and pushed her in the woman's direction. "Hinata-chan, go inside and play with the other children. Me and Sakura-chan have grown-up things to discuss." Hinata pouted, her lavender eyes flashed in the sunset's light, and for a brief second, he saw a different Hinata. Pain lanced through his chest and a burning feeling scratched the back of his mostly blue eyes. He gave the little girl another push, hard enough to unbalance her this time, and Hinata squealed and laughed as Naruto made motions of chasing her. She disappeared in through the shoddy door and joined more sets of childish laughter. Sakura watched her go, and after a second called after her. "Hina, dinner's at 8. Naruto vaguely heard her respond, through the wood and aluminium that made the siding to the houses. Sakura smiled softly, not just at the girl's actions, but that she had made Naruto smile a true smile. That was a notable feat these days. Even getting him to fake a smile was hard since that fateful day. Pink hair flashing in the dying sunlight, Sakura moved forward, embracing the blonde. Naruto, although he wouldn't admit it, was a little shocked. Sakura's hugs were far and few between. Something bad must have happened. He wanted to embrace the warm feelings that arose for the now quiet woman, but he quickly pushed them down, hoping they would disappear quickly. Although he loved Sakura with all of his heart, the love was just little more than he would love a sister. A few feelings and a few dreams here and there was the only difference. Or at least he thought anyway. He never had any siblings other than the ones he had adopted over the years. He could feel Sakura's gentle but firm fingers trace up his back in slow, soothing circles. She buried her face in his neck, staring fixedly at his dull green pendant he had received from her mentor, and the closest thing he had to a mother many years prior. Her heart panged painfully in her chest for the man in front of her. On one side of the complicated plate that was Haruno Sakura's life, she still, after all of these years, her heart pined for Sasuke. She knew it was stupid, fruitless, and futile to even dwell on such thoughts, but what girl could ever forget their first love? And what a love it was! Stealing away from missions to sneak a kiss here and there, and when Sasuke finally died, her heart had been utterly broken. Maybe had he died from a different set of hands it would have been different, but no one could even relate to Sakura as she shakily told the leader of her team how Sasuke had wiped her tears with a bloody hand after she had slid her blade into his heart. Moving her torso so her chest pressed against Naruto's flak vest, she stared straight into his broken and cold eyes. They usually reminded her of icicles, unforgiving and dead, but as she stared at them from such a close distance, picking out the flecks and streaks of red, they almost seemed to warm for her. She closed the distance between them and pressed her lips against his, gently at first, but again with increasing hunger. She vaguely felt one of his hands gently make its way through her long hair, and his other hand pressing the small of her back closer to him. Naruto's initial surprise was quickly forgotten as the feelings he had tried to bury arose in his chest with a passion as strong as ever. The feel of her lips, cracked and chapped against his, was foreign and alien almost. The feeling of her heart racing so hard he could feel it down her spine through his fingertips only served to excite his own heart into beating faster and faster, causing a small rumble at the back of his mind, vaguely reminding Naruto that he was disturbing Kyuubi no Yoko's precious beauty sleep. He ran his fingers through her long silky hair, memorizing the way it was sliding over and through his fingers, and how it left the scent of strawberries and peaches behind. Pushing the small ball of resentment, denial, and nervousness down into oblivion, Naruto and Sakura found themselves stumbling through a worn and poorly lit hall into an equally worn and poorly lit room. The room was small and dingy, peeling paint and a weathered wood floor that showed every knot and spit. A picture frame with no glass, as it had long been broken, and a small candle decorated the only table, which was actually just an overturned box, in the room. Sakura gave Naruto a small grin that revealed nothing about her, but promised everything. Naruto pinned her against the wall, making the wood groan in protest as he tugged down the zipper of Sakura's red top as she practically ripped his vest off. Lucky for her, today was a hot day, and after hastily throwing his vest away, she was graced with the sight of his, surprisingly, scarred chest, well-toned and gleaming with sweat. His bad luck necklace was gleaming dully in the flickering candlelight of Sakura's humble abode. Placing kiss after kiss down Sakura's neck and collarbone, Sakura groaned partly from pleasure and partly from frustration. She grabbed Naruto's hair and practically threw him over, causing him to tumble over onto her futon, knocked the candle over off the box table as well. The candle snuffed out as soon as it landed, surrounding the pair in darkness, and Sakura gave a grin so wide Naruto swore he could hear it. A cool shiver ran down his spine, and the blonde grinned just as wide as the pink-haired beauty descended on top of him. Years and years prior, when Akatsuki still roamed the lands striking terror in men and women across the world, Naruto had been a happier person. Not that he was one to be defeated by depression. Not even when Jiraiya had died had he backed down. No, he got right back up, trained harder than he had ever in his life, and stood back and watched the fruits of his labor as he took out the paths of pain one by one with relative ease, compared to other shinobi anyway. Coming back to Konoha when it had been completely destroyed had been a huge blow to himself. Konoha was his home, and although there were times when he didn't feel all that welcome in it, it was his and it was staying like that. In that battle he had lost a few people dear to his heart despite Tsunade's best attempts to save the villagers. But he wasn't completely disheartened. Sure, Konoha had been destroyed, but it was just a collection of houses and things. His friends were alive, and that was the most important thing. They could build another village any day. All they had to do was defeat pain and start picking their lives up. If only it were that easy. The last path of pain, a fellow student of Jiraiya, as he had found out, proved to be extremely difficult to defeat, and when he finally did, another friend and precious person had been claimed by the tyrant's wake of death. It was sad for a while, but he picked his life up, trained even harder. He knew, from reading Jiraiya's notes about the paths of pain, that the original, the puppet master himself, was not dead. He was probably not even in the vicinity. So he made sure to destroy the chakra receptors to delay him. To give him enough time to train even harder. He wouldn't know it until someone had pointed it out to him later, but at the tender age of 18, after 2 years of training for the final battle with whomever was behind the pains, he had far surpassed Jiraiya in skill and power. He could defeat Rock Lee with his hands tied behind his back in a battle of taijutsu. He could utterly wipe Kiba with ninjutsu, but Kurenai and Sakura both could still make Naruto think his head was on fire. He'd have to hope that the final pain wouldn't resort to genjutsu. In the 2 years before his final confrontation, Konoha had been partly rebuilt. Civilians cramped themselves together on one side of the Hokage monument, which thankfully suffered little to no damage, and the shinobi had taken residence near, in, and around the old Uchiha residence, which was relative untouched. Most casually thanked the Uchihas for being snobs and building the compound as far as possible from the village gates. The last remaining Uchiha had not been too pleased at this recent development. He was angry about Konoha being destroyed before he could get there to destroy it himself, but he was even angrier that everyone had taken residence in his old home. He gritted his teeth as watched ninja bustling in and out of the buildings, stepping on his sacred grounds, and in a way, invading his personal space. His revenge on Konoha, although not carried out by his person, was complete, and with that, he dropped everything and left, popping by occasionally to clash with Konoha bounty hunters, Hunter Nin, and Naruto. Although he took his main reason for ever even being in the vicinity in the first place to the grave with him. The final raging battle between the puppet master, who turned out to be a weak and frail man by the name of Ihiko, seemed like a joke. In the beginning at least. When he unleashed a jutsu that had the effect of a bomb, similar to the one that one of the pains had let go on Konoha 2 years prior, and brought the population from a thriving 10,000 people to a meager 200, Naruto went berserk. That was the first and last time Naruto had ever reached a fifth tail. After that battle, most of the new Konoha was nothing but rubble, and every single person in the village looked at him with nothing but fear in their eyes for a very long time. All but one person. It was odd, in a sense, that the death of nearly everyone in the village had been the spark to bring Naruto and the ever-shy, but strong and capable Kunoichi together. She had lost her entire family save Niji, and a distant cousin whose name she couldn't even recall at the time. Lee had died in that attack, along with Chuji, Kurenai and her son, Kiba and his entire family, Konohamaru and his 2 friends, the Ichiraku chefs, and Sai and Ino, whose bodies were found under a collapsed building, still clutching hands tight in death's merciless grasp. Hinata, at first, had avoided him, but not out of fear. She had felt that showing the weakness, the loss of everyone dear to her save a few, were only to be shown to Shino, whose shoulder she cried on frequently. But eventually, Naruto found that when he looked at her, she didn't flinch, and she held no hate and no fear in her eyes when he caught himself gazing into them. It intrigued him, and one thing led to another. Akatsuki was gone, Orochimaru and Kabuto were both long dead, and Sasuke didn't even pose a threat anymore. His frequent drop-bys were becoming more and more like teasing, a nah you can't catch me kind of thing. Hinata and Naruto never really made anything official, but the look on Naruto's face when Hinata announced that she was with child was the happiest Sakura had seen Naruto in a long time. Oddly enough, it was also the most scared she had ever seen him. The pink-haired medic Nin, now revered as a goddess among people for her skills in the medic area, the only one left who could heal anyway, wasn't even sure if the couple knew she was in the room at the time. Ever since she had put a blade through Sasuke's heart, through her own heart, she had become a wallflower. Shutting herself away, locking her heart up and throwing the key away. Few were concerned. As long as she wasn't self-mutilating and still healing, rebuilding the pathetically small village came first. Civilian families with relatives outside of Konoha left, reducing the population more. Only Shinobi, still loyal to the ever-weakening Tsunade, who had barely survived the last attack that left her chakra system so weak she was useless to heal and fight, had stayed. Some civilian families with nowhere to go had stayed, and had been trained to fight, with only the elderly spared the rigorous training. Soon, the small population of Konoha slowly grew, from just over 100 to just over 200, with any person over the age of 5 able to fight with at least the capabilities of a fresh-out-of-academy genin. Things were good. At least, until the first winter in nearly 30 years that had actually produced snow. It was a cold and snowy December day that Naruto felt his life slip out of control for the umpteenth time in his life. Sakura woke alone. She rolled over and saw her clothes had been neatly folded and placed on her table box. Her picture, an old worn one of Team 7 when it had first been formed all those years ago, had been laid face down, and her candle had been relit and perched neatly on top of the box. Sakura sighed. She wondered if Naruto felt guilty enough not to even have the decency to stay with her until she woke, or at least woken her up when he had to say something to her. Anything would have sufficed. Tilting the picture of Team 7 back up, she gazed longingly at it. Kakashi had been the first to die, fighting valiantly against pain, but ultimately losing to a nail being driven through his forehead. Sasuke's face, so young and not quite as hateful as it would have been, didn't send waves of pain through her heart as much anymore. It was almost a relief that she was able to move on. The pain of not being able to function, breath even, whenever she saw a flash of raven hair in the distance, someone starting a word with SA, and the sound of his sword when he let it slide out of his sheath, tantalizing her kunoichi instincts to fight. It was all too much. She looked at herself, her young, naive self. Had she known what would have happened in the future, she would have trained harder and obsessed less about being the next Mrs. Uchiha. Next to her stood a very grumpy-looking Naruto. She almost smiled. Looking at this picture, she saw the secret warmth that secreted through his old mask. Years of watching his face, memorizing every detail, had led her to read him like a book, even in photographs. The only one who could do it better than her was Hinata. Those were the good old days. The days when all she had to worry about was whether or not they could catch the Fire Lord's wife's cat before lunch. Dressing quickly, she tied her hair back in a loose braid that fell to her mid-thigh before exiting her shabby little house. It was dark, she had probably missed dinner, and little Hinata was probably angry at her for not helping her with her homework like she had promised. Naruto paced his bedroom. Although Konoha technically wasn't a village anymore, and therefore could not have a Hokage, the villagers still addressed him as that or Uzumaki-sama in the least. He had long stopped trying to get them to stop, partly because it was futile, but mostly because he stopped caring. His room was probably the biggest in the entire village. And it was only roughly 3 times the size of Sakura's dingy little closet she called a bedroom. Attached to his room was the main office where he worked and accepted the few missions that die-hard loyal citizens from other small towns and cities still trickled in sometimes. When he had woken up in Sakura's bed guilt-stricken, he had quickly and quietly tidied up and left a quietly snoring Sakura in her futon. Why had he done that? Sakura was his closest friend, his only real friend, nowadays. Shino was a close second, but he didn't talk much. Behind him, as he paced back and forth in front of the window that overlooked the Uchiha compound which held nearly the entire village, Hinata moaned and stirred in her sleep, no doubt having dreams of jumping through trees. According to her teacher at school, her class had just mastered that technique. He himself remembered the amazing feeling after he had mastered it, and how wonderful the dreams were. Halting his pacing, he leaned over his daughter and tucked her in tighter. The girl smiled in her sleep and Naruto's heart melted just a little more. Her dark hair was spread out in a tangle around her, and the white ribbon that Sakura had no doubt dug up for her was hanging down on her forehead. He brushed the hair and ribbon out of her face and sat down on the bed looking at the stack of paperwork he would have to fill out for the death of the wise Hyuga he had called his friend and brother-in-arms. Naruto could feel the plague of nightmares just threatening to surface when he lay his head down for the night. Shaking his head and ridding his mind of such thoughts, he inwardly conversed with Kyubi for a few seconds before closing off his mind and sitting down at his desk. His only light was a small white candle that smelled of roses. He took his pen in hand and sighed tiredly. He would get no sleep tonight. Prying one eye open, Naruto saw Sakura ushering Hinata to quietly leave the room. When the little girl was out of the room, he uttered a low groan and Sakura turned her head. The look she gave him was one full of a painful love. She knew he probably felt guilty about the previous night, but these things happen between mature adults, and well, Naruto was just going to have to work it through with her, preferably on the floor. Sakura smiled a little wider, intriguing and scaring Naruto all at once. Naruto lifted his head, clear and refreshed from a, surprisingly, nightmareless night sleeping atop his desk. Imprints from pencils and papers and the occasional paper clip decorated his face, and Sakura almost laughed. Naruto's face was a lot more serious in comparison. He scratched the back of his head tentatively. "Listen, Sakura-chan, about last night I didn't." Sakura raised a very strong finger and pointed at the ceiling. She shook her head and gave Naruto a stern but loving smile. One a mother would give her son who picked the wrong answer in life, and she was now guiding him towards the path of right. There is nothing to be listening about. What we did was in the past. It can either be forgotten as a release of tension between two adults who have suffered, or it can be the start of something beautiful. I know that you will always love Hinata, and I will always love Sasuke, but I'm sure that Hinata just wants you to be happy. There is nothing to be guilty of. Naruto made a face and Sakura started talking again. Don't make that face. Guilt was written all over your face from the moment you woke up. She moved closer, leaning down, teasing his imagination with her shiny little zipper clasp that hung so alluringly on the blue shirt she wore. Naruto nearly shook his head. Zippers were turning him on, something must be wrong. Sakura leaned so that her lips were brushing his ear. Besides, judging by last night's performance, I would love an encore. Naruto flushed red and gaped like a fish out of water. Sakura stood back and laughed, her voice a mixture of sweet wind chimes and a screeching banshee, if one can imagine such a combination. She turned and gave him a sexy little strut out of his office/bedroom that screamed her intentions louder than he could ever shout, and he used to be Konoha's #1 loudest ninja. A flash of her pink braid, and Sakura was gone from the room, intent on escorting little Hinata to school like she did every morning. Hinata was practically her daughter in every right but birth and name, and by the gods she wasn't about to lose her to an evil scraped knee or skinned elbow. Hinata skipped merrily along the street, waving at the villagers in the small and extremely tight community. Everyone knew each other, and yet, with most being shinobi, secrets were kept easily and gossip was minimal. The few people who had seen their chief, and pretty much only, medic Nin and Sword of Hokage frantically trying to eat each other's faces as they blindly stumbled to Sakura's little shack kept it to themselves and either mumbled troublesome kids or regarded it as an SS-class top-secret mission that was to be kept classified until something official was announced. Then, they could gossip. Today was a treat at the academy. Sakura and a few of her underlings in the medic world were going to assess the chakra manipulation skills and control of all of the academy students from year 2 and up, with the intent to recruit. Nowadays, if you had the skills to become a medic Nin, you were considered god. It was what every academy student trained for, honing and perfecting their control and stamina, a few of the older students even delving into jutsus themselves to impress Sakura when she came every 6 months. Needless to say, the school was buzzing with excitement. Walking into the rundown building that used to be some kind of dojo area in the Uchiha compound, Sakura mused at how Irika-sensei, one of the few people that had survived everything up until now, was still teaching and had decorated the dojo to look like a large classroom very similar to her own all of those years ago. Shino, the only other member of the Rookie 9 that had survived, was also a teacher, along with a third woman whom Sakura had gotten to know very well over the years. When the makeshift little bell rung, all of the students filed frantically into the dojo. Today was the day they might become heroes of the village. They had been training and training for even a slice of praise from Sakura. Being told that with a few more years in honing, medical jutsu were possible, was only a step down from being recruited. It meant that she would be back, and it meant that they weren't part of the disappointed crowd. Sakura smiled when the children all cheered at the sound of her name. She secretly loved the attention, not actually so secretly, but don't tell her this, she'd rip your arm off and then sew it back on just to rip it off again. She could do that. After giving her brief lectures on all the responsibilities and duties and expectations that being a medic Nin held, it only served to heighten the excitement, something the spring-haired woman was extremely proud of. If only Tsunade were well enough to see this now. Smiling at her own memories, she called the first name on the list, all alphabetical thanks to the meticulous Shino, and saw that a shy little girl with light green hair and a large forehead hidden by bangs approach her. As soon as she put her fingers together, Sakura had her first recruit. Akino Kakuna shyly twiddled her way back to the cheering crowd. Sakura couldn't help but grin. This girl, who resembled her greatly at her age, even had the same kind of name. Autumn of Chrysanthemums, which grew all over the forest edges and fall in the ruined village of Konoha, only furthered her liking for this child. Maybe one day she would be the next Tsunade, or even the next Sakura. Sakura shuddered. She hoped not. Not with all the horror she had seen. Zarahi Kinko-san, Sakura called. So far from the 60 or so students, she had recruited 14 and had seen potential in a further 23, a good crop this year. Kinko stood up to Sakura. She was one of the older students, and a tall one at that. She almost reached Sakura's eyes. She confidently put her hands together and formed chakra. Sakura opened her mouth to congratulate her when a large chakra burst suddenly appeared from somewhere south of her position. Immediately worried that the Kyuubi had tried to escape again, she turned her body around to face the grating feeling of whomever's chakra this was. The ground started to shake. Naruto had fallen asleep again when all he heard was growling and had the odd feeling like someone was scraping a cheese grater across his back and arms. Fully awake and looking around, he already knew that the growling was from Kyuubi, but when he looked out of the large window that looked over the compound and the badly damaged Hokage monument, he saw a person wrapped in a ball of blue chakra. He watched almost in slow motion as the person formed a large ball of pure, cheese-grating chakra and threw the ball, now the size of himself, at the compound. He reached a desperate hand out, hoping that it would help, but was quickly thrown back into the wall of his room as pretty much all of the compound was destroyed, including where he was. Coughing and picking himself out of the rubble of the building that had once been his home, he could vaguely hear the sounds of people crying and screaming, but everything was being blocked out of his hearing. There was only one thing that was important enough to do this, and that was quite obviously the safety of his daughter. She was the last remaining Hyuga, the only thing left of Hinata, and the only person left who held any part of his ever-dying heart. Pushing people out of the way to cross the 3 or 4 kilometers it took to get to the school was the longest 26 seconds of his life. When he saw the state of the school, his mind went blank and he just stared. The building had been blown apart, being quite close to the epicenter of the attack. After another moment of hesitation, he practically dove into the pile of rubble and started digging like his life depended on it, which it did in a way. All the while, his life, 6 long years ago, kept flashing in front of his eyes. It had snowed then. The first snow Konoha had seen in over 30 years, due to the naturally warm climate of the volcano-rich country. The children were excited, building men and ninja out of snow, some using them as target practice, but the adults were not so enthusiastic. This meant that the winter crops would die, and probably a few elderly along with it. The one thing they didn't expect was that the buildings, never having been built to hold the weight of anything but themselves and a few ninja jumping on them, started collapsing. The first was one a surprise, and due to the actual building itself being shabbier than the norm, no one batted an eye. No one was hurt, and the neighbors moved over a tad to make room for the family who had lost a home. The second one was more serious. A whole party had been going on, and it took the medical team and others an entire day to find and collect the injured and the dead from the rubble. Despite the fact that Hinata was nearly due, she was a valued medic and was needed. She and Sakura and about 6 other medics were crowding around the injured, healing, soothing, and in Hinata's case, mostly bandaging. Naruto had been on his way to the makeshift hospital to give Hinata her day-early birthday present when the horrible crunching sound that would haunt his sleep for years to come sounded from around the corner. It sounded exactly like tons and tons of shingles, wood, and aluminium would sound like as it collapsed in on itself and landed on crunchy December snow. He didn't really remember anything after that. It was all a little fuzzy. Sakura had filled him in. The building collapsed from the snow on the roof, and that in turn caused the second story to collapse on the first, which was where Hinata was. Sakura, being on the second story at the time, escaped most of the weight, whereas Sakura, who had regained consciousness after only a few moments, had been mortified to see Hinata's mangled body. Her entire upper body had been buried in the supports of the building, and her long blue hair shone hauntingly in the crisp daylight. Sakura watched a snowflake fall onto the once shimmering locks before she could even muster enough will to move. Checking the vitals of the mangled body, she soon confirmed it to be a corpse. Through all luck, Hinata's belly was untouched, and the baby, already almost due, was moving around, dying with each second that she didn't get her mother's life-giving blood. Sakura made quick work. Naruto does remember something about that horrible night. He just doesn't want to go back there and revisit it. He remembers the horrible feeling of seeing Sakura, his best friend and adopted older sister, push herself out of the rubble with only minor injuries, carrying a small and surprising quiet little baby girl with fringes of blue hair and white eyes that could gaze into one's very soul. He remembered the look on Sakura's face when he asked about Hinata, and then he remembered the crushing feeling in his chest when Sakura shook her head and handed him the baby. The old feelings, the old memories, the old fears were all resurfacing with years of vengeance behind them. Naruto kept digging and digging. Why couldn't anyone just leave Konoha alone? They weren't big enough to do anyone harm, they were peaceful, and they weren't even classified as a shinobi village anymore. Why did everyone always want to ruin his life? He touched a hand and stopped cold. The hand was slender, and the fingers were long, but the palm was calloused with years of use on kunai and various other sharp and pointy objects. Frantically pushing the last beam off the buried arm, he met the sight of a pair of warm green eyes. He almost sighed a breath of relief when he realized that the eyes were quickly fading, becoming cold on such a warm day. He searched the woman's face, looking for signs of life, but among that tangled pink hair and the blood-stained face, he found none. To say that Naruto was numb was an understatement. That is what people would say for years to come, mainly because when he pulled the last beam trapping her body, or the upper half of her body anyway, he died. That's what they say. He up and died. Naruto stared. He dropped the beam, and he stared. He stared as hard as he could, but it wouldn't move, no matter how hard he willed it. Picking it up carefully, like one would a glass figurine, Naruto could feel the life slipping from his body. Everything became cold, colder than he had ever been in his entire life, colder than the dull and dead eyes of his daughter, whose face was flickering between that and her mother's. Not only did he die, they would say, he turned into a monster. 9 long tails made of pure fire and chakra sprouted from very being, and he was Naruto no longer. They were wrong, of course, he was still very much Naruto, just not a conscious Naruto. He stood in front of the gates of the Kyubi, rusted and broken, but still able to hold the monstrous beast, and cried. Kyubi felt sorry for him. A human emotion brought on by sorrow so powerful that it imposed itself onto a demon. Onto the very spirit of a demon. When he had stopped, which was surprising quick, it almost hurt Kyubi to see the look in the man's eyes. He may have been an unforgiving demon, but he had lived through the hardships Naruto had suffered since the day the insufferable Yondaime had put his soul into the belly of a baby. Naruto looked up and stared the demon right in the eyes. He reached out and stroked the seal, sending a wave of shivers up the Kyubi's spine. "Kill me," he said, and before anything could be done, he ripped the seal off, causing the broken and rusted gates to swing wide open. Naruto was assaulted by the red chakra and stood about as much chance against it as one would against a tidal wave. He was thrown against the back of the black cellar, but when death did not come, he saw that the Kyubi was still standing, tall and proud, in his cage, his stare flickering between Naruto and a new figure standing where the seal had been previously. His hand was held up the fox and he turned to look at Naruto, his blue eyes sad, and his blonde hair messy. There was blood on his mostly white robe, as well as piece of paper he held in his hand. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, yet the loudest he had ever heard. "No. The seal has been broken, whether by force or by will, but I will not let my death be in vain. Countermeasure Plan B has been activated. Prevent this, if forced, and if willed, shame on you," the man said. Naruto gaped, and Kyubi looked about as much of a fish as a gigantic fox demon could. The man, the Yondaime as Naruto had quickly deduced from photographs he vaguely remembered seeing as a child, started to glow brighter and brighter. He saw the cage rebuild itself, and he let tears slip down his cheek. All he wanted to do was die, and no one could even let him do that. Before the light was so white it was burning his retinas, he heard the fox scream with rage before pumping chakra at the white so hard it started to melt the skin off of Naruto, which was quite a feat considering that they were in his subconscious. The white light stayed persistent, however, and when his vision had been permanently burned for good, the pain, the pressure, everything just stopped. The roar of the chakra-enforced wind stopped as suddenly as it had become, and when Naruto opened his eyes, he saw a pickpocked ceiling. Corkboard tiles painted a horrendous white color. He heard the steady beeping of a heart monitor, and sighed inwardly. Pulling the clip off of his finger, rather painfully, although no part of the blonde showed it, he tried to swing his legs over the edge of the bed. Actually, it was a rather nice bed. He must not be in Konoha. A quick glance at the window showed a tree, a nice big maple tree. Somewhere in the fire country, for sure then. Naruto nodded stiffly as the pain of the cold tile under his feet made his legs spasm in pain. He felt Kyubi tugging at him, trying to pull him down into his soul, but he ignored it. When a teenager, barely 17, rushed into the room followed by a pair of men in long white coats, doctors, Naruto reminded himself, he was forcefully lifted back into bed and strapped down. "Stop. You'll hurt yourself more. Now just sit back, you've had a rough day. Here, I found you, so Hokage-sama says I have to watch you until you are good enough to talk to him." The teen offered his hand, despite the fact that Naruto had just been strapped down, and Naruto just stared at. Hokage? He was the Hokage. What the hell was going on? Looking up at the teen, he said himself, looking at a young man who looked similar to how he did, with the blue eyes, blonde hair, and warm smile, but was decidedly more feminine looking. At least, that was the only word that came to Naruto's mind at the moment. The needle that one of the doctors had stuck in him before they had left him strapped to a rather nice hospital bed was starting to work its wonders. He found Kyubi's call irresistible and let his eyes flutter shut with little resistance. Maybe if he closed his eyes, he'd never wake up again. It was a comforting thought. The last thing he saw before black overwhelmed his sight was the worried face of the blonde teen whom apparently was in charge of him. He could hear Kyubi snarling and snapping his jaws all the way from the end of the tunnels where he always started his short walk to the main chamber of his soul. Tiredly making his way to the giant fox demon, Naruto rubbed his face. He needed a good nap, and perhaps a good drink to forget what happened to Hinata. He choked quietly as the memories of his daughter's death flooded him. Kit. His almost affectionate nickname from the fox rang out, startling the blonde. He hadn't realized that he had walked all the way into the chamber. Greif always put spaces in his attention. Gazing up at the fox, Naruto gasped. The usually arrogant and regal being was now fading. He looked no more substantial than smoke. Naruto held his breath. He didn't want to blow Kyubi away by accident. Despite being a murderous demon, the two had grown close, in an I can't kill you so I might as well make the best of it way. Kyubi lowered his muzzle onto his paws so that he could look the blonde in the face. What happened to you? What happened to me, actually? Why am I still alive? Naruto asked, barely louder than a hoarse whisper. Kyubi sighed, letting out a small whine. When he spoke, his voice sounded muffled, like he was speaking over a telephone. The yondaime. That rat bastard. His plan B was to send you back to yesterday to redo the events and stop whatever had made you pull the seal off. Ugh. I was finally free too. Naruto sat down. This was pretty big. If he was in yesterday, then he could save Hinata and Sakura. A large grin rose on his face as he thought of his daughter, looking more and more like her mother every day. This is amazing. I can save her. Naruto was giddy, and he was glad he was sitting down. His legs felt like jello from the stress being lifted. The Kyubi whined quietly. He had really actually liked the older Hinata, especially when Naruto would forget to turn his mind off when the two decided on being intimate. He also liked the little runt of his, although Naruto had never noticed it. The girl reeked of fox, and Kyubi couldn't be prouder if it had been his own. The bad part of this was going to kill him. Why are you smoky? Naruto said, suddenly and solemnly, almost expecting the worst. Kyubi looked at him, almost sadly. I'm sorry, Kit, I truly am. Naruto frowned, creasing his mature face. Kyubi never apologized. Never. Something was up. Standing unsteadily, he made his way to the polished and sparkling bars of the cage. He paused, hesitating, before sticking his arm through the bars, and right through Kyubi's face. Gasping in horror, he backed up. I interfered. The chakra I released trying to get out despite that blonde bastard. Kyubi earned a half-hearted reproachful glare from Naruto. It interfered. We didn't go back to yesterday, we went farther. I don't know when, it might be mere days or weeks, it may be years. I can't see outside your body anymore. Naruto paused to take the information. Before his eyes, Kyubi seemed to get more and more transparent with each second. What's happening to you? Naruto said, obviously worried. Kyubi gave his best impression of a noncommittal shrug. No idea. I don't think I'm dying though. Maybe we went back before you were born. Maybe we went back before I was born. Naruto gaped. He couldn't imagine a time before Kyubi was born. The being was centuries old. He watched as Kyubi became nothing more than a small wisp of smoke. His voice sounded more and more like he was trying to talk through a pillow. With a final farewell from the fox demon, the wisp vanished and Naruto felt the need to sit down again. He stared at the empty cage. Loneliness overwhelmed him, pounding his chest with a force almost enough to move him physically. Everyone was leaving him, even the curse that was usually the cause of the leavings. Another pang struck his chest. This time it was enough to shove him back a few inches. Naruto stared at his chest in horror. Another pang and he was thrown back a few feet, smacking his head on the hard concrete, and doing the opposite thing of the real world. He woke up. White lights blinded him, but he couldn't close his eyes. A flurry of activity rushed around him as he saw people he didn't know, all with worried and intense faces, lean over him. He was vaguely aware of a shrill noise in the background that seemed to swallow everything else up. His chest and throat burned like he had been stuck in the desert for a week with no water. One of the men hovering above him shouted something and the faces all leaned back. He rubbed two dull silvery things in his hands together and placed them on Naruto's chest. For a moment, the coldness of the paddles was all that he could feel, but that feeling was erased by the feeling of something kicking him square in the heart with the force of Rock Lee. He took in a breath, only now realizing that his chest had been burning because he hadn't been breathing. He let loose a scream of pain when that cool life-saving breath he had taken was let out. The man, a doctor he had assumed, backed up, mercifully not intending on putting those silver paddles of pain back onto his body. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and it probably wasn't helping that the only nurse who hadn't filed out of the room yet was pushing something into his foredrip, via syringe. Letting out a sigh, his throat and chest still a little sore, the blonde shut his eyes peacefully, completely unaware of the visitor that had yet to leave the room. When Naruto woke next, he didn't panic. He knew he was in a hospital, and that he was probably not going to die. Now he had just had to figure out when and where the hospital was. His eyelids were still heavy, after effects of the drug they had used to calm him down. Groaning, he placed his hand on his forehead tenderly, noticing that he was hooked up to a multitude of machinery. He also noticed that his forehead was completely wrapped in gauze. Normally Kyubi would have healed any wound in minutes, but thinking of the fox only reminded Naruto of how lonely he was doomed to be. "Are you coherent enough to talk?" a smooth voice to his left said. Naruto glanced over and saw the teen he remembered hovering when he had tried to walk earlier. "Where am I?" he said. His throat felt about as bad as it sounded. The older blonde pulled his plastic chair closer and said, "You're in the hospital. Do you remember what happened to you?" Naruto, annoyed that he hadn't named a city or village, grunted again and said, "No. I don't think I'm going to remember much. What city is this?" The blonde gave a sad little smile that almost made Naruto feel bad for not knowing what had happened to him. The man beside him was strange, and strangely familiar. "You're in Konoha General, finest hospital in the 5 great nations." Naruto choked on his breath. In a way, this was better than he expected. Konoha's hospital had gone down when pain had originally attacked nearly 10 years prior to his memory. Unfortunately, this meant he'd probably have to restart his relationship with Hinata. Not that he would miss that at all, it's just the thought of all of their happy memories had been flushed down the drain like that. The blonde was staring at him questioningly. Naruto sighed. "Who are you?" he asked finally, and the teen stuck his hand out promptly, and said, pride lacing his every word. "Namikaze Minato, 17, Chunin, at your service." The name rung at the back of Naruto's mind as he grimaced at the enthusiasm in which Minato had introduced himself, and ignored the blonde's hand. Minato seemed to be unoffended when he withdrew his hand. Eyeing the shorter blonde for a second or two, Minato said, "Do you remember anything? Your name, where you came from, anything?" Naruto was distracted looking in the back of his mind for where the name had rang a bell. He only half heard the question, and answered reflexively. Naruto. He paused halfway, cursing himself in and out. If he was in the past, he probably shouldn't have given his name out until he was sure where he was. If he ended up somewhere before his birth, he could have just killed himself. Minato seemed to see the uneasiness in his face and misinterpreted it. "Oh, you don't really remember anything, do you? Well, Naruto, I'm going to get the Hokage. We'll be back in a moment. Try to rest, and don't overdo it, that head wound is pretty nasty." Naruto watched the blonde leave. Hokage? He envisioned Tsunade in her busted glory. How he missed the woman of his youth, and not the miserable old woman plagued by memory-halting diseases and a crippled body, shouting out for Nawaki and Dan, and never for Naruto or Sakura. He had tried to stop visiting her so often. Every time he left the place, the hole eating his heart had grown bigger, but the woman was his surrogate mother, not easily given up. Minutes passed. The tension to see the woman he loved so much pass through the doors into the white room was almost unbearable. When the doors finally started to open, Naruto nearly screamed with anticipation. Minato entered first, his eyes focused on the now very much alert blonde in the bed. Behind him followed someone Naruto didn't recognize. He had salt and pepper-colored hair, a receding hairline, and an unlit pipe hanging from his mouth. The older man waltzed right up to Naruto, who was recovering from his hopes being squashed like a bug. "Hello, Naruto. My name is Sarutobi Hiruzen. It's nice to meet you." At the mention of Sarutobi's name, Naruto shot his face up so fast it hurt his neck. He gaped wide-eyed at the man he loved like a grandfather. How far did he go back? The Sarutobi of his world was older, quite older, actually. So this was definitely before he was 12, maybe he was still a baby. No, there had been no recognition in his eyes at his name. Naruto shook his head sourly. Kyubi pushed himself this time. "Hello," he said cautiously. Sarutobi smiled pleasantly, his face creased with the wrinkles that Naruto was more familiar with. Maybe he wasn't that young. Naruto quickly resolved to raise himself if that indeed turned out to be how far he was back. It would be awkward and weird, but he would definitely give himself a better life. Nodding slightly, Sarutobi cleared his throat, and Naruto, who had been spacing off, snapped to attention. "Should I come back another time, Naruto-san? You still seem a little dazed." Naruto shook his head, feeling childishly sour at how Sarutobi said his name, lacking the care and love he was used to. I just wanted to ask some questions, and maybe answer some, if you don't mind. Naruto nodded slowly and adjusted himself so he was sitting up against his pillows. Sarutobi sat down on Minato's chair so that he was face level with Naruto. Eyeing the blonde up, Naruto noticed that he didn't even pause at his face, as if his whisker marks weren't familiar to him. Naruto quickly shot his hand up to his face, making sure he still had them. To his relief, 3 small smooth marks still decorated his face, reminding him that the loneliness he felt gnawing at his gut was indeed real, and he hadn't imagined everything. Sarutobi took a note of his actions, but decided to file it away for later. So, tell me what you remember, Naruto-san. I'd really like to know. His voice was smooth, trustworthy. There wasn't a wonder he was always a people person. It was hard to not tell him everything. Everything would probably land him in Ibiki's care if Ibiki was even here. Naruto shrugged and said, I remember my name. Naruto frowned, feigning concentration, trying to come up with something that would sound plausible. I remember fighting with someone. I can't really remember anything else. Sarutobi sighed. He clicked his pipe on his teeth and said, in the same soothing voice, Can you remember your parents' names? Maybe your surname? We might be able to find your parents, although you don't look like any of the students here. We could even find them if they were from a different village. Anything would help. I'm sure your parents miss you very much. Naruto twisted his mouth sourly, his eyes deadpanned. Not looking at either of his guests, he said quietly, I'm pretty sure my parents are dead. Minato pursed his lips, and Sarutobi sighed, sitting back. Naruto crossed his arms and looked out the window, somewhat upset that the Hokage had to remind him of how alone he was now. Although why he would be asking a grown man who his parents were was a little absurd. He glanced down at his arms. Uncrossing them, he looked at the machinery attached to them. Wait. Why were his hands so small? Turning them over and wriggling his fingers, despair started to creep up his spine. Turning to Sarutobi, he said in a rush, Old man. How old do I look? Minato let his eyebrows rise. Not very many people called the Hokage old man and went unpunished. Sarutobi merely laughed, wondering if the boy realized how rude he sounded. 12 or 13 would be my guess, although you look a little undernourished. Listen, if you live on the streets and just don't want to tell me, it's okay, I can set you up in a good foster home. He panned off as he saw the look of absolute horror on the boy's face. He was about to ask what the matter was, but the horror switched to anger, and then to nothing. In his mind, Naruto was screaming. 12? 12? He was going to have to go through puberty all over again, he screamed. Almost expecting the fox to tell him to shut his trap, only silence greeted him and the loneliness wormed its way up, seeping all his anger away. Naruto took a second to calm himself. What is the date? Naruto finally asked, through gritted teeth. If Sarutobi had been affected by the way Naruto was speaking, he didn't show it. Instead, he calmly, in a voice that helped soothe Naruto's anger away, he said, It's June 11th, Naruto grimaced. Today was Kurenai's birthday. He imagined Hinata would be putting a present on her grave, like she did every year. Naruto resisted the urge to cry. He felt extremely weak in both body and soul. The year? He asked, trying to calm himself. Sarutobi prattled off the year and Naruto almost sighed. He was way back. If his dates were right, he was back almost 8 years before he was born. Glancing at the blonde who was hovering behind Sarutobi like a mother hen, worried expression and all, Naruto choked again, this time enough to make him cough. Are you alright, Naruto-kun? Minato asked. Naruto waved a hand, pounding his chest with the other. Sarutobi reached out and gave his back a pat in a half-effort to help. Glancing at the blonde again, he had finally figured out why he looked so familiar. Staring at him with a concerned look on his face was the very young and inexperienced 4th Hokage. Sarutobi turned to the man who would eventually follow him in his line of work and said, quietly and calmly, I think you should probably get back to your class. I'll handle the boy. When he is ready to be released, I will call for you. If things turn out the way I think they might, I'll have a mission for you, Minato. Minato nodded stiffly and gave Naruto one last glance over his shoulder before disappearing. Naruto had stopped choking by now, and instead was trying to sort his feelings out for the blonde man. He couldn't help but feel a little resentment for the pain he had gone through as a child. Are you feeling okay enough to talk some more, Naruto-san? Or should I come back another time? Sarutobi asked gently. Naruto shook his head. Sorry, my throat hurts. I keep choking on it. But I want to keep going, I feel fine. He saw the Hokage's glance flicked up to the bandage wound around his head. Nodding and pulling his pipe out to inspect it, he said, We found you mangled up in the playground at the academy. Do you have any idea how you got there? Naruto blinked. He hadn't. Quickly shaking his head, he pulled the blankets over his arms. He felt cold. After examining you, patching up your wounds, and sedating you after you had tried to get out of your bed, you started seizing as soon as you were fully sedated. At first we thought that it was an allergic reaction, but Sarutobi trailed off, thinking about what Minato had told him earlier. Naruto was staring at him wide-eyed, anxious to hear more. But, he said, noticing for the first time that his voice was strangely high-pitched. Resentment smoldered in his stomach for the years of growing he had to redo. Sarutobi didn't smile. What had happened was strange. He wasn't sure he should tell a child. Sighing, he decided that the boy might have more answers than he would. Well, according to Minato, when the nurses tried to hold you down to prevent you from hurting yourself, a seal, one that he wasn't able to identify, which as you might find out later, is a big thing for that kid, appeared on your stomach. Naruto gulped, letting his hand rest on his belly. Sarutobi continued. The seal lit up in red chakra, the likes of which no one had ever seen or felt, starting seeping out. I had felt it in my office, and I can tell you, boy, it was evil feeling. When it all left, you went into cardiac arrest and clinically died for 6 minutes, before your heart decided it wasn't ready to quit on us yet. Naruto gaped. Openly gaped. He knew exactly what had happened, years and years of having the Kyuubi in his body, only to lose it all at once. Naruto was secretly surprised to still be alive. Do you remember if you were a shinobi? The aging Hokage asked, tenderly, as if the subject might awaken some fury hidden deep in Naruto. Glancing at the old man, willing the memories of his adopted grandfather away, he said, I remember fighting. I don't know, maybe? Sarutobi nodded and rose from his seat. Naruto watched him stand up. Well, I think I've stressed you out enough for the day. The doctors say that you could be out of here in a few days if you take it easy. Just cooperate with anything they ask, and if you remember anything else, please send someone for me. They know that you are a priority patient. If you have any questions, feel free to ask anyone anything. Get some rest, Naruto-san, I'll be seeing you. Naruto shivered. The old man could be creepy when he wanted to. Lying back in bed, he let his lids flutter. He was still so exhausted. The cheerful sun, unaware of the horrors it would witness in the years to come, shone merrily on Naruto's tanned face. If he lived, he'd been years and years older than his friends, a price he'd gladly continue paying just to see them safe. Smiling softly for the first time in what felt like years, he drifted to sleep and actually slept, peacefully and dream-free. The rest of the week passed by without further incident. Minato had faithfully come by to visit every day at 3 o'clock. Naruto hadn't heard another word from the Hokage, but he hadn't really expected to. He knew all too well how busy a job it was. Today, although, was Naruto's last day and he was pretty excited. Minato had dropped by early in the morning before school started. He was a teacher at the academy, as Naruto had found out early on, and told him that after he was discharged this afternoon Minato would be taking him to see the Hokage about living options. 3:30 rolled by with no blonde teenager in sight. Naruto sat on his hospital bed, dressed in some hand-me-downs from Minato until Naruto could get out shopping for something that fit. The more he stared at the clock, the slower it seemed to tick, so Naruto stood up, still a little wobbly from the sudden height adjustment he was still getting used to, and paced the room. Naruto had grown pretty close to Minato over the last 7 days. The taller blonde would often sit for hours just talking, telling Naruto about his life, asking stupid questions, asking good questions, things to keep Naruto from feeling lonely. Although when Naruto asked if he had any friends outside of Naruto, Minato put on an unsteady smile, and said that they were usually too busy for him. After that, Naruto had wisely let the man continue talking. He knew the look in Minato's cerulean eyes all too well. The doors finally cracked open, letting in a tired-looking blonde. Naruto grinned widely, happily acting like a 12-year-old. Being discharged from hospitals were always happy memories for him. Minato stepped inside and took a quick look at Naruto. The bandage around his forehead was reduced to just a piece of gauze covering the wound. He would often berate the shorter blonde for scratching it. The baggy clothes that Minato had managed to dig up from his closet fit Naruto very badly, as Minato as he was more than a foot taller, and broader in the shoulders and waist. The older blonde couldn't help but chuckle at the child's appearance. Putting his hands on his hips, he smiled brightly and said, Well, Naruto-kun, are you ready to leave this place? Naruto almost jumped with joy. He had been patient, letting the nurses and doctors poke and prod him, but the alluring sight from his window almost broke his will to stay until everything was done. I've never been readier, Naruto said, almost tripping with the few steps it took to cross the room to Minato. Minato frowned. Are you still having trouble walking? I can get someone to look at that, he said, tentatively. Naruto shook his head quickly. No, it's nothing like that. I just feel like my body is the wrong size. I'm sure I'll get used to it. I'll have it down pat in the next few days. Telling partial truths were always easier than lying. Minato didn't need to know that he was really almost 6 feet tall, and definitely not as scrawny as he was now. The journey to the Hokage's office from the hospital was a familiar one to Naruto, as Sarutobi had often requested his presence after particularly harsh beatings. Although when Naruto had gotten older, the route had changed from street to rooftops. Walking at the slow pace Minato was setting for the younger blonde was killing him, but he put on a smile and stumbled down the street. The only thing that Naruto felt uneasy about was that no one was glaring at him. A few were staring, but he was pretty sure it was more at his clothes and state of being than him himself. The Hokage's secretary, a younger version of a woman that Naruto vaguely remembered as a child, gave the pair of blondes a distasteful look that made Naruto flinch. Minato glanced down at Naruto before shooting the lady an equally distasteful look. The taller blonde made a note to ask Naruto about that. Hokage-sama is ready to see you, she said, looking down her hawk nose. Minato nodded stiffly and pushed the younger blonde gently into the office. Sarutobi was sitting at his desk, puffing his pipe and sorting through paperwork. Glancing up, he made brief eye contact with Naruto, leaving him once again saddened by the lack of warmth he was used to. Hello, boys. I trust the rest of your week has been without incident. Both blondes nodded in unison. The aging man let out another cloud of smoke and placed his paperwork down in a neat pile. Resting his elbows on the dark wood of his desk, he folded his fingers together and said, I've had some tests performed on you while you were in the hospital, and the Hyuga clan has determined that you have a very well-developed and frequently used chakra system. Naruto's eyes widened. What other tests did the Hokage perform? Sarutobi's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. If you wish, you may remain a civilian and I will allow you to receive a stipend until you obtain steady work. Or you may choose to be instated as part of our shinobi force, under strict supervision and limited actions until we can be sure that you are indeed just a victim and not a spy in our midst. Your chakra seems to be very well developed. You may in time become a great asset to the village of Konoha. Naruto inwardly cringed at the suspicion, although he knew it was appropriate and necessary. Sweeping a bow with just the right amount of respect, if not a little too much, Naruto gazed at the floor and said, his voice annoyingly high-pitched. With your permission, Hokage-sama, I feel I would best serve Konoha as a ninja. I will dedicate, and if the job requires it, lay my life down for this village and every person who resides in it. Sarutobi and Minato blinked at the seriousness of the statement. Naruto remained bent, his eyes picking out patterns in the carpet. Sarutobi took another long drag of his pipe, savoring the sweet taste of the special tobacco he had ordered from the small wave country that bordered the fire territory. Flicking his fingers, he said, You may rise. Naruto rose and stared directly into Sarutobi's brown eyes. The Hokage searched the boy's face for any sign of faltering or deception, but found none. Satisfied for the time being, he smirked, breaking eye contact. Minato noticed Naruto relax a little, and put his hand on the shorter blonde's shoulder. Naruto glanced up at him before smirking. I hereby instate Naruto as a Konoha genin, and with such responsibility, I expect you to do everything in your power to protect Konoha and its citizens. Naruto broke out a large smile, genuinely glad to be back in the fighting force. The aged Hokage shuffled his papers again before sighing. Now comes the problems of housing and a team. Minato spoke up for the first time since entering the office. His hand never left Naruto's shoulder, and Naruto was glad for it. He was never one for casual contact, but something about Minato made him relax more than usual. I volunteer a room in my house for Naruto-kun here. Naruto gazed at Minato, unsure of how to feel. It wasn't very often that someone offered something like this to Naruto, coupled with the fact that Naruto was still under suspicion of being a spy. Sarutobi sat his desk, seemingly unsurprised. All right. That goes perfectly with the team problem. Minato, I realize that I have yet to properly congratulate you on your passing of the Jounin test this morning. Minato stiffened into a proper stance before his leader. Thank you, Hokage-sama, it is most appreciated. The Hokage gave a small smile and said, As your first mission, I hereby assign Naruto here as your personal student and apprentice until such time as he becomes Chunin, or gives his life in the line of duty. Naruto winced at the last line, but smiled openly at what this meant. He would get to be taught by his hero. His grin did not go unnoticed by Sarutobi or Minato. Minato patted his shoulder again and slightly pushed down on his back to signal a bow. If that is all, Hokage-sama. Minato glanced back up and saw Sarutobi nod curtly. You are dismissed, he said, and Naruto stood back up and was gently guided out of the door by his new roommate. Minato waited until they got to the street, stopping only to help Naruto when he tripped on one of the steps. So, I think a congratulation is in order, Gen and Naruto. Naruto grinned and rubbed the back of his head. Minato rubbed his chin and gazed over the busy afternoon of Konoha. Why don't we go to this little ramen stand that set up recently? I think it was called Ichiraku or something. Come on, let's go. Minato tugged on Naruto's sleeve and he more than happily went along. In his time, Ayame had died in the first attack, and Tucci had passed during the snowy winter he had lost Hinata. Naruto shook his head. His mouth was turned down in a frown, but he berated himself. This was no time to dwell in the past or future. He could change everything, and this time, no one would die. Minato watched the grim look on Naruto's face suddenly turn to determination. The sad look in his blue eyes almost went unnoticed, but Minato caught it out of the corner of his own blue eyes. After they had seated themselves and ordered from a much younger Tucci, and a woman that Naruto assumed was his wife, Minato turned to Naruto and said, "Why did you flinch when the secretary made that face at you?" Naruto paused, and then shrugged. "Did you remember something?" Naruto shrugged again and said, "It was more of a feeling. I think that people used to hate me when I was child. I don't know why. Maybe wherever I'm from, I was the village pariah." Minato gave a nervous laugh and patted the younger boy on the back. You are much too cute and lovable to be a pariah." Naruto turned a bright red and slapped Minato's hand off of his back. "Bah, shut up, Minato. I'm not cute." Puffing his cheek out, the younger blonde pouted and caused Minato to laugh even harder. He didn't stop laughing until the ramen came, smelling as good to Naruto as always. This time, though, he savored the taste of the meal as much as he could, causing Minato to finish first. He hadn't had a bowl of Ichiraku in nearly 7 years. "What's wrong? Is the ramen not good?" Minato said over a mouthful of noodles from his second helping. Naruto wiped a tear quickly and shook his head, eating slightly faster than before. Minato didn't say anything else, and Naruto cursed, letting the nostalgia get to him. "It's excellent. I couldn't have asked for anything better." Naruto paused for a moment, before looking into his noodle broth. Thanks, Minato. For letting me stay with you. That's really nice of you." Minato sucked a noodle up, noting Naruto's pink cheeks, and smiled. "No problem. It's not like I could put a cute little kid like you on the street. Us blondes gotta stick together." The future Yandame Hokage of Konoha's smile was infectious. Anyone who knew him from Naruto's time could have told you that, and now Naruto was falling prey to it. A large grin spread across his scarred face as he punched Minato playfully in the arm as punishment for calling him cute. Sweating and topless in the hot summer day, Naruto and Minato both were posed in a steady stance with their arms out. In unison, they both slowly brought their front foot around in a semicircle until it was positioned behind the next one. The scraping of the loose dust and dirt made a few birds that were perched on the ledge of their makeshift training area, situated on top of Minato's apartment roof, look at them warily, before going back to pruning and cooing and whatever else birds do in their spare time. Another arm moved, followed closely by a shorter one, and the motion was repeated again and again until Naruto's movements became more like one who knew what he was doing, rather than copying what he was seeing. Minato flicked his glance over to the sun and nodded, dropping his stance. Naruto did the same and let out a breath, stretching his arms and rubbing the cramps from them. "Ah, Naruto-kun, that was great! You've almost got it all down to memory." Naruto rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment, but smiled brightly. Minato had spent the last 4 months teaching him some slow-moving, but difficult exercises. They were meant to teach the body discipline while building stamina and muscle without furious movement. They also helped, as Minato had suspected they would, with Naruto getting a feeling for how big his new body was. Not that Minato knew why he'd be feeling that. A falcon soared across town, dipping low to screech loudly before taking off again. Minato looked up, tossing a towel to his apprentice, and sighed. "I have to report to the Hokage's office." Naruto nodded. "I'm going to go grocery shopping. Is there anything you want specifically for dinner?" Minato raised a finger and said. "We haven't had pork in a while, right?" Naruto shrugged and wiped the sweat from his face with the towel. Minato slipped a white tank top on before shrugging his green jounin vest on and jumped off the side of his apartment building. Naruto watched him run and jump over a few more buildings before he suddenly turned his head to look behind him. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end, but after a close scan of the street, he realized that there was nothing there. Frowning, he picked up Minato's discarded towel and walked down the side of the building into his small bedroom's window. Panting and pressing herself against the wall of the alleyway, a red-faced dark-haired girl with pearly eyes that seemed to almost glow in the dark of the alley silently thanked any and all gods that had anything to do with her not being discovered. If her family found out that she had been spying on someone for something other than a mission, and on hot sweaty boys nonetheless, they would be scandalized. They'd probably throw her out, and Hizashi would never let her live it down. Thinking again of the shorter of the two, her heart fluttered harder than it had when she first spied upon him a few months ago, and her vision darkened as she flitted out of consciousness and melted to the ground, a smile and a blush gracing her unconscious face. Sarutobi had just finished cleaning his crystal ball when Minato tapped on his open door. Nodding, but not taking his eyes off of the slightly opaque sphere, Minato stood at attention, staring straight ahead. Sarutobi ignored him, giving the ball another rub. Minato was a good boy, Jiraiya had taught him well. Sarutobi was well aware of Jiraiya's intentions for the blonde, and if it weren't for Orochimaru expressing an interest in the position of Hokage, he would have named him a potential successor already. Sighing, he gave his ball one last wipe of the cloth and set it down on its purple velvet cushion. "Good afternoon, Minato. How are you?" Minato was still at attention, but his stance relaxed almost unnoticeably. "Good afternoon, Hokage-sama. I am excellent. Fresh from a workout with Naruto-kun. His progress with controlling and disciplining his body is excellent." Sarutobi smiled and pressed his fingers together, forming a tent. "Ah yes, Naruto-san. I must say he is a bundle of energy. Very outspoken, yet still polite. Reminds me of a certain blonde at that age." Minato grinned. It reminded him of himself as well. "I have called you in a little earlier than usual this month for a reason, but first I'd like to get the usual out of the way. Has Naruto shown anything unusual?" Minato shook his head. "His uncertainty with his body has almost disappeared. I've only seen him fumble 6 times this past month. He still talks in his sleep, and as before, the only names he talks about are the 2 Hinatas. I finally asked him about the name, and he shrugged and said that he remembered a little girl named Hinata, and an older one with the same name, but a different person. I saw the look in his eyes. I think they may have been family or friends that have died." Sarutobi nodded. "Any information on his origins?" Minato shook his head. "Nothing, sir." Sarutobi let his hands fall to his desk before he pushed a small manila folder towards Minato. "As you recall, I had blood tests done on Naruto-san when he first arrived as protocol for any foreign or unidentified patients in the case that they are comatose, or die." Minato offered a slight bow of his head, glancing at the folder. "Well, the interesting thing was that when we tested his blood with this new system that Tsunade had perfected the research for, called DNA testing, God help me if I know what that means, well, we found that Naruto-san has a relative here in Konoha." Minato's eyes shot up. He was not expecting that. "Hokage-sama, with all due respect, why are you telling me? Should you not be informing Naruto-kun that he has a family here that probably misses him?" Sarutobi sat back and nodded at the folder. Minato bent and grabbed it, opening it and scanning its contents. The blonde sputtered. "But this is impossible." "Is it really, Minato?" Minato glanced down at the paper and saw a pair of sheets with a strange picture that consisted mainly of a few columns of horizontal stripes. The first one was labeled Namikaze Minato and the second one was labeled Naruto. Several of the columns were circled and numbered on his own sheet, and when he compared them to Naruto's sheet, the circled column on Naruto's sheet, which made up of about half of them, were identical to Minato's. On the bottom of Naruto's sheet, the words, handwritten in red ink, approximately 49.5% of Subject N's DNA matches with Subject M. Other than a few abnormalities make up no more than 1% of Subject N's DNA, there is a 99% chance that Subject N is Subject M's father, full-blood brother, or son. Minato noticed that his name was printed in a different hand and ink than the researcher's hand. "I'm fairly certain he is not your father, and I'm certainly hoping his is not your son." Minato sent him a warning glare. "Hokage-sama, please." Sarutobi just smiled. "How can he be my brother? I was orphaned, Sensei can vouch for me, he was there." "How much older are you than Naruto-san?" Minato glanced up at him quickly, but returned to rereading the confusing amount of numbers and letters that were printed and written on the pages. "I don't know, about 5, give or take a year." "How old were you when you were orphaned?" Minato's face paled. "I was 5, but the bandits, they burned half the village down before Sensei drove them off. I was sure I saw their bodies." "Are you?" Minato took a few steps back and sat down in a chair, not bothering to ask permission to sit in Sarutobi's presence. Sarutobi didn't mind this time. "My father for sure. I identified his body by his ring. My mother I thought I was sure. Her body was burned really badly." Minato looked weakly up at the Hokage. "Are you telling me that my mother wasn't killed? That she was taken by the bandits and then Naruto is the product?" Sarutobi shook his head. The sheet says that Naruto would have to be your full-blooded brother. I'm saying your mother was pregnant before she was taken. She may not have even known. She may have escaped the bandits, or they may have taken mercy on her because she was with child. I don't know, but that sheet says that she survived long enough to bear another child, and that boy is your brother. It would explain the resemblance. Minato took one last look at the manila folder before doing something that Naruto would later laugh his ass off at. He fainted. Minato stared at the slightly yellowed ceiling. He traced the patterns of the dots in the tile, and the yellow smoke stains that flowed out from the direction of the Hokage's desk. The folder, which contained only a few pages, felt like it weighed 100 pounds as it pushed down on his stomach. Would you like something to drink, Minato? Minato looked up, which let him see the man that had been the one constant in his life, from an upside-down world. Minato sighed and let his hand drop to the floor. Gigi, I don't know what to do. Sarutobi sipped his tea quietly. You could go home and tell Naruto-san that you are his brother. I'm sure the boy would be ecstatic. It might even jog some memories of what happened to him. Minato looked at him with something of a glare in his eyes. He knew that the Hokage thought the entire situation was amusing. Sarutobi noted the look in Minato's eye with a chuckle. I want you to go home, Minato. Take the week off, actually. Spend some time with Naruto, and after the week has ended, I expect a report on his behavior. While he has shown nothing but devotion, and now there is no denying that he is your brother, he is obviously not from Konoha, and due to his suspicious entrance, could still be a spy. Minato tightened his lips but nodded, opting to walk slowly out the office, delaying his arrival at his small apartment as much as he could. He didn't want to ruin the perfectly happy student-teacher relationship he and Naruto had. The boy was the epitome of a genius of hard work. He never stopped, and his stamina seemed nearly endless. Not to underestimate the boy, he was also intelligent, and was able to think up battle strategies on the fly, something that was invaluable in the battlefield. The only thing that irked Minato was the look of experience that appeared in Naruto's eyes sometimes. He was sure the boy wasn't telling him all of the memories he had been getting back. The sky was dark by the time Minato pandered by Ichiraku's, and as an icebreaker for the revelation of his lifetime he picked up a couple of bowls of beef and miso-flavored ramen. Naruto was reading on the lumpy couch in the kitchen and dining area when a tired and downtrodden Minato finally came in through the door. Naruto snapped his book shut and sat alert. Minato sighed and placed the bowls carefully on the table, followed by the manila folder. He flashed Naruto a tired grin before sitting. Sorry. It took a lot longer than I thought it would. Is there still some dinner left? Naruto nodded and joined him at the table. Yeah, I left your half in the fridge for later, if you want it. Thanks. I brought home Ichiraku as an apology. I hope you accept it. Naruto smiled widely. Well, if it's Ichiraku, then just maybe, if I put together all the sympathy I have left in my heart, I could forgive you. Minato laughed. I'll take that as an acceptance. Dig in, I've got some stuff to tell you. Naruto happily did so, as well as Minato, although the taller blonde was eating at a slower pace. About halfway through their bowls, Minato swallowed his mouth full of noodles and said, So the Hokage gave me the results of the blood tests that we did when we first found you. Naruto stopped eating, his wide blue eyes trained solely on Minato's, his cheeks still full of food. Minato sighed and slipped the paper out and showed his roommate. Naruto took a second to scan the page before promptly spitting everything in his mouth all over the paper, and by default, Minato's face, which sat only a foot behind them. Minato shouted and dropped the papers to rub his face. Naruto shouted as well, and tipped the chair backwards until he fell. This knocked the wind out of him, and caused him to start choking on air and leftover ramen. Minato tried to shake the half-chewed pieces of noodles off of the papers, and berated himself for showing him the papers during dinner. As he lay on the ground catching his breath and dislodging noodles from his airway, to say that Naruto was shocked was an understatement. He knew what DNA testing was, as it was considerably more advanced when Sakura had given him a crash course in it, and he knew that it was pretty damn accurate. When he saw the part about sharing DNA with Minato, the suspicions, and in Naruto's case, dream, that he had been the son of the great Yondaime had been confirmed in one simple test. He outgrew wanting to know who his parents were when he was a child, and surviving the hate from the civilians was all he could concentrate on, and as he grew and became a ninja, the topic never came up that often. The shock of everything falling into place was a huge blow. Of all the people who were chosen to take him as a ward and student, his father was chosen. Naruto could almost laugh. Minato was about to rush to the dazed-looking blonde when he saw the expression on his face turn into one of surprised joy. You okay? He called, and Naruto turned to look at him, this time with a look that seemed to be memorizing every detail of his face. Yeah, I think so. Minato nodded. Yeah, so? You're my little brother, eh? Fancy that. You sure you don't remember your parents? Your mother, maybe? Naruto blinked. Of course, parents shared the same amount of DNA as siblings did in most cases. Minato was much too young to have a 12-year-old son. And no. Sorry. Man, I can't believe I have family other than well friends. The look of loss appeared in his eyes again, and this time Minato took initiative. Did you remember someone? Naruto didn't respond for a second, before nodding. He needed to talk about, if only to get the weight off of his chest. Was it Hinata-san? Naruto looked up at him and scrambled to his feet, picking the chair up with him. We were close. I wasn't liked by the village, and her family had discarded her in favor of her younger sister. She wasn't my first friend, but she was definitely my closest. We were family. Naruto shook his head and wiped a tear that had formed before it spilled over. What happened to her? She was sea-crushed. It had snowed for the first time in a while, and the buildings couldn't handle it. Minato took a step over to the blonde and pulled him into a tight hug, not unlike one that a relative would give another relative after not seeing one another for a long time. Naruto's eyes snapped open in shock, but after a few moments, he realized that this man, although not yet, was his father, and Naruto gratefully accepted the one thing he wanted most as a child. The loving touch of a, albeit unknowing, parent. Despite Naruto fully accepting the fact that he was in the eyes of Konoha, the blood brother of Minato, a rising star in the ranks of shinobi, he still found having a family that did not consist of a small girl who looked like her dead mother or a woman whom he could not love with all of his heart, unsettling and awkward. Although to be fair, Naruto had tried to act normal, if a bit more little brother-like, or how he perceived one to be anyway, Minato was making things incredibly awkward with unnecessary guilt, mother-henning, and gift-giving. It was quickly growing old. Shrugging the small bag that contained a spare shirt, a towel, a few styrofoam bowls of instant ramen, and some water, Naruto was glad to be outside, even in the heat, and away from the taller blonde. Maybe this annoyance is really what it was like to have an older sibling. His mouth turned into a frown. He was missing being an only child already. Intending on blowing his steam on some wooden posts on one of the many public training grounds, he clenched his fists in anticipation. He had yet to do any kind of harsh training like this, as Minato had been focusing on restoring his movement fluidity and muscle control than the raw strength Naruto knew he had. Before he turned the bend of the street that blocked the view of the grounds from his sight, he heard a small noise that sounded almost like a child crying. A noise he knew too well from his own childhood, and from when little Hinata was a baby. For all of his strengths, a child or girl's crying were something he couldn't deal with. He hesitated, pondering whether or not he should turn on his heel, when he heard the second noise that the crying had overpowered. A steady thump-thump-thump that continued for a few beats before another sob escaped from whomever was in the grounds. The blonde hesitated for another few seconds. It sounded like someone really needed to beat their frustrations out on someone. An unsteady grin crept up onto Naruto's face. If this worked out right, the girl, men don't cry, of course, who was crying might be angry enough to spar him. He'd be willing to take a few bruises and deal with a few tears to train with someone that wasn't a wooden post or a mother-hen older brother. Turning the bend, he raised his arm to announce his presence when the person, a girl that seemed to be about his height and age, was short, and choppy dark hair, spun her head around and gasped loud enough that Naruto heard the painful hitching of her breath in her throat. She stared at him for a full second before her eyes, a color that Naruto couldn't quite catch as rather suddenly, her face turned a beet red, and in a motion that was almost déjà vu, she collapsed to the ground in an ungraceful heap. Naruto let out a shout as he dropped his bag and bounded over to her in an attempt to catch her. He didn't quite make it, but he managed to snag the edge of her jacket, honest who wears a jacket in the summer heat anyway, accidentally tearing along the zipper seam, revealing the tight indigo material that he had seen a number of kunoichi sporting around the village. Naruto blushed, getting an eyeful before he settled her down on the ground so her face wasn't ground in the dirt anymore. He pulled her headband off of her forehead as it was askew and covering her eye and nose, he couldn't help but gasp. The girl's face was a pretty oval shape, and other than a pair of fuller lips and slightly closer set eyes, she greatly resembled how Hinata looked before he left with Jiraiya. He could already tell that once she trained off all of her baby fat and grew into her assets, she would be a killer kunoichi, in more than one way. The green manji symbol with the hooked bars that extended across her forehead stuck out and looked decidedly odd on a face that resembled Hinata so much. He ran a callous finger over it, making the girl stir, but not awake. If she had the caged bird seal, it meant that she was a Hyuga. The pale skin and dark hair also confirmed this to an extent. Although he had never seen another Hyuga, other than Hinata of course, with inky hair. Although Naruto supposed that he had not met many Hyuga, since he didn't really start his relationship with Hinata until after Konoha's destruction, and after that there were few left, only 10 or so, and they all had black or brown hair. After a solid 10 minutes of staring at the girl's face, lost in memories of Hinata, he finally decided that she was probably not very comfortable laying on the dirt and grass. He nudged her arm a few times, causing her to groan and lift an hand to cover her eyes, which he presumed correctly to be the typical white of the Hyuga clan. The girl groaned again and brought her other hand to her face, accidentally smacking Naruto's knee. Naruto by now had sat back, and was watching the girl with a certain curiosity. Lifting the hand on her eyes off of her face, she saw just exactly who was sitting near her. Her face turned a lobster red and she squeaked. Sitting straight up, she covered her hands with her face and started crying again. Whoa, whoa! Why are you crying? Are you hurt? The girl shook her head, her tears reducing to hiccups as Naruto patted her back awkwardly. I'm so embarrassed. Naruto stopped patting and grabbed one of her hands, pulling it away from her face. He flashed her a grin before saying, Don't be embarrassed. From what I saw, you were beating the tar out of that log. Man, I'd never want to be the subject of your anger. Clear pupilless eyes shone with shed and unshed tears. But why you saw me faint again? She buried her face in her hands and started sobbing again, this time sounding angry. This always happened to me. Naruto stood up, garnering her attention again. He gave her a classic Lee and Guy thumbs up complete with the flashing smile. She shuddered involuntarily, and Naruto felt sick to the stomach. He could not believe that he actually did that. It seemed to halt the girl's tears though, so it was worth it. What's your name? He asked, helping her up, only to discover that she was a solid 3 inches taller. His ego deflated a bit, but he hid it behind a friendly grin. The girl blushed again, and brought her hands together in front of her, bowing slightly. Hi Himawari. Hyuga Himawari. Naruto nodded. He stretched his hand out and said, My name is Namikaze Naruto. It's nice to meet you, Himawari-kun. Himawari took his hand gingerly, and he gave her a nice strong shake. The shake off-balanced her somewhat and caused her to look down, only to notice the state of her jacket. My jacket! Oh no, father is going to kill me. This was my best one. Naruto grinned sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. Sorry about that, I tried to catch you when you fell, but it only caught the tip of your jacket and it ripped. I can pay for it though. Himawari shook her head and fingered the edge of the large hole. It's okay. I can fix it. Thank you for the offer though. Naruto noticed that she spoke quietly, but without stuttering. Perhaps the pressure of a branch member was decidedly less than one of a clan heiress. So can I ask what has you so frustrated? Or if it's personal, that's fine. Himawari flicked her eyes at his face before letting her cheeks tinge red. She couldn't believe that he of all people was talking to her. He actually sounded interested in her. Her situation crashed down on her again, and she frowned. I found out that I was put in an arranged marriage today. The bitterness in her voice surprised Naruto, as she had a rather gentle manner of speaking. It's not unusual for Hyuga, but the man in question is a cold-hearted jerk. Himawari sighed and Naruto patted her shoulder. Well, that sucks. How about a spar? I can see that you're still tense and I'm willing to be your beating bag for a bit. I haven't had any rough exercise in months. I've been recovering from a coma of sorts. Himawari gasped and brought her hands to her lips. Oh no! What happened? Are you sure you'd be okay? I'm sure, no worries, I heal fast. Himawari seemed to shrink within herself. I don't know, are you sure? I wouldn't want to have you expend yourself. Naruto rolled his eyes and grabbed her hand, causing her to heat up like a lobster. Come on, it'll be fine, you're starting to sound like my brother. Naruto placed himself in a balanced stance before her. Himawari hesitated, but only for a few seconds. The blonde realized that she was probably not going to strike first, so he took the honors, and brought a tanned fist in towards her face. As he guessed, Himawari slapped the fist away with barely a thought, bringing his arm down with a slight pull, a move that would usually unbalance someone. Naruto, however, had fought Hyuga before, and had often encountered this move. He swung his arm down and back, going with the flow of her pull, and since she still had a light grip on her arm, it tugged her down, surprising her slightly. Aiming a punch with his other arm, Himawari dropped into a squat, shooting a hand out and hooking the back of his knee with her fingers. Pulling back sharply, she slapped an open palm against his stomach where his seal used to sit, and knocked Naruto over backwards. The blonde used the momentum of the fall to push back into a flip, as Himawari tried to sweep his legs out from under him. Righting herself, the dark-haired girl settled back into a steady stance, before glancing down and frowning. Her jacket was open and no doubt Naruto would use it as an advantage against her. Shedding the ripped garment, she settled back into her stance, unaware of how bouncy, for lack of a better word, she was. Naruto struggled to push his blush down. He could feel his will failing though. Those things he had to admit that although he liked Hinata for many, many things, her breasts were a gigantic plus. He never told her that, however, he was afraid she'd beat him up like most of the other girls he had known would. He was so distracted that he didn't even realize that Himawari had moved until her open palms slammed into his throat, dealing a killing blow, had this been a real battle. Naruto choked and fell over, coughing and wheezing as Himawari fretted loudly over him. The battle wasn't a complete loss for the blonde, though. He managed to grab a nice squeeze when she got him in the neck. The red that painted the blonde's face was only partly from lack of air. Not too far away, a small boy with spiky black hair sat watching the battle from a clump of bushes. His mouth was open in awe. He was looking for some ninja to bother into helping him train, and when he spotted the blonde, he thought he had a potential candidate. Until the girl with the strange eyes brought him down with a single hit, and not even a punch. Maybe he should ask her instead. Approaching the pair, he kept his distance until Naruto finally noticed him after being helped up by Himawari. The blonde eyed him before saying, "What are you staring at, kid?" The boy blushed. "I'm not a kid. I want you to help me train," he shouted, screwing his eyes shut. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Me?" he said, and the boy opened his eyes again. "No. You got beat by a girl. You. I want you to help me train." He raised a finger and pointed at Himawari, who started. "And me? You want me to help you train?" The boy nodded and grinned widely. "Yeah. You took him down with one strike. Even if you are a girl, you must be strong. Unless he's super weak." Naruto protested, but other than a tongue being stuck out in his general direction, he was largely ignored. Himawari looked around, clearly nervous. "I don't know. I'm not the best fighter in my clan. I don't know if I could teach you how to fight at all." She rubbed her arm and the boy shook his head. "No way. You're amazing. I can tell by the way you stand, you're a real shinobi. Just like my cousin Fugaku-sama." Fugaku? Where had Naruto heard that name before? "Hey kid, before you go off trying to steal my sparring partner, what's your name?" The boy puffed his chest out and said proudly. "Uchiha Obito." Naruto's voice hitched in his throat, causing Himawari to glance at him worriedly, just in case her hit had done lasting damage. The blonde stared at the young Uchiha. He was proud, but he held almost none of the cold arrogance that most of his clan held. In fact, the way he stood and talked suggested to Naruto that he was a lot like himself at that age. The boy's black eyes suddenly shone with unshed tears and the small boy swore, rubbing them, pulling a small bottle of eye drops out of his pocket. Naruto had heard the story of a boy named Obito from Kakashi only once before his teacher had died in the attack on Konoha. Grinning, he nudged the girl beside him and said, "I think you should do it. Teaching someone might help with your confidence, especially someone so loud and obnoxious." "I heard that, you bastard." Himawari frowned. "Obito-san, you shouldn't swear. Not only are you not anywhere near old enough to even know those words, they are not very polite." Obito blushed and scoffed. Himawari smiled and squatted down to face Obito at a face-to-face level. "You realize that your family and my family both would not take kindly to me teaching you anything, right?" Obito nodded. He knew of the feud with the clan with the creepy white eyes. "I don't care. If someone's strong, then someone is strong. It makes no difference where they are from. I just want to protect everyone." Himawari smiled and put a delicate hand on top of Obito's black mop. "Okay. Meet me here tomorrow at 6 a.m. sharp, and don't be late, or you'll regret it." Obito turned pale and nodded, before running off, no doubt to tell his mother of this wonderful news. Himawari turned to Naruto and blushed. Naruto felt the urge to roll his eyes. "You don't have to be so shy around me, Himawari-kun. I'm not going to judge you or anything." The girl blushed harder before wringing her hands. "I am sorry." Naruto shook his head. "Ayano, can I ask you to help me? I have no idea how to train anyone. I'm not that good with kids either." Naruto smiled. "Of course I'll help you. I know a lot of discipline exercises from my brother. They could help, and it might be fun, you never know." He gave the girl a large grin, and was rewarded with a small but pretty smile. Wind ruffled the hair of a young blonde as he lay in a patch of long green grass. The wind brought the scents of the village along with it, filling the boy's nose with smells of fresh baked breads and sizzling barbecues. Inhaling deeply, the blonde smiled softly and watched the clouds roll past. Normally he had no attention for this kind of activity, but it was his first day off from a 3-month-long slew of small but tedious escort missions. In each one, Minato used the terrain to encourage him to strain his body in different ways and positions. It was almost like a more intense version of the ninja game he used to play as a child. Of course, when he was a child, he wasn't dodging small bolts of lightning and barrages of sharp kunai. Ignoring the small sting of a burn that had yet to heal all the way on his left elbow, Naruto watched a cloud that looked vaguely like a rabbit morph into a shuriken. It had taken a year, but he finally felt that he was at the limit of what a 13-year-old body could do. Naturally, that put him miles above most of his peers. Minato was really a brilliant teacher. The younger blonde really wished that he had a chance to be raised by him. Minato seemed like he would have been a fantastic father. A small scuffle in the bushes behind him was all the warning Naruto got before a sandaled foot was placed firmly on his forehead. Naruto relaxed and stared up at the figure with his arms crossed. "We have another mission." The younger blonde sighed loudly. "Another escort?" he asked, fully intending on begging the Hokage for something with more variety. Dignity be damned. The vicious smile that curled Minato's lips did not look promising. "Something better, that I can promise you." Naruto pushed his brother's foot off of his forehead and scrambled to his feet, an excited smile brightening his face. Minato pulled Naruto's head down with his arm around the younger boy's neck and huddled closer to him. "We have a border patrol/infiltration mission. And the best part, we get to do this mission with someone I've been waiting to introduce you to." Naruto made a noise of joy and clapped his hands sharply before rubbing them together. "This sounds like fun. When do we start?" Minato straightened up and stood like a proper jounin. "Pack for a month, with the possibility of it lasting longer. Meet us by the northern gates in an hour and a half. That will give you enough time to say goodbye to your girlfriend." Naruto's face lit up a bright cherry red before he sputtered out, "Shut up, Anai-san. She's not my girlfriend." Minato just laughed, and with a flourish of his hand and swirl of leaves, he vanished, leaving Naruto infuriated. He hated it when he did that. It was probably where Kakashi had picked it up. Himawari was exactly where Naruto had thought she would be, training Obito. The young Uchiha was sitting in the grass in front of her, copying and memorizing the 12 hand seals. He could hear the boy's high-pitched voice reciting the animal signs as he made them, repeating faster and faster until he inevitably made a mistake, in which Himawari made him start all over again. The Hyuga always brightened up when he entered her line of sight. It was cute, and despite his unwillingness to dwell in the past, he still felt that little tugging of his heart when he saw her face. She looked so much like Hinata. Naruto wasn't stupid. Not anymore anyways. He was pretty certain that Himawari was related closely to Hinata, and as much as he knew she would be happy to be in a relationship with him, he refrained. Her up-and-coming marriage to someone in the Hyuga clan didn't help either. She refused to talk about her family, and he didn't know any other Hyuga he could ask about it. He still couldn't look at her face without seeing his long-dead lover. It wouldn't be fair. "Naruto-kun." Pang. She stood quickly and gracefully, interrupting the young boy in front of her. Obito glared at Naruto and stuck his tongue out, something he would not have gotten away with had Himawari been watching. Naruto smirked and accepted the hug that Himawari enveloped him in, winking at the glaring and now blushing 8-year-old. "Himaheim, I'm leaving for another mission in about an hour, so I have to make this quick. I still haven't packed." Himawari's face fell, and Naruto rushed to cheer her up. He couldn't stand sad girls. "Hey, don't be sad. I'm going for about a month, but I promise I'll buy you something cool." Himawari smiled sadly. Life was so boring without Naruto around to make things colorful. The blonde looked down past her at the now standing Uchiha. "Hey kid," he said, crouching down and ruffling the boy's hair, much to his disdain. "I need you to take care of Himaheim while I'm gone. Can I count on that from you?" Obito smiled wide with a smile that looked so similar to his own. "Of course I can. No one will touch Sensei." Obito struck a pose and both Naruto and Himawari laughed. Glancing up at the sun, Naruto bit his lip. "I have to go, you guys. I'll see you later. Be sure to make lots of trouble when I'm gone." Obito laughed in agreement, but was quickly stifled by a scandalized Himawari. "Be safe, Naruto-kun. Come home in one piece," she shouted as he turned the corner. Naruto waved and picked up his pace. At this rate he'd be late. Turning the last corner before his meeting point with Minato, Naruto just about had a heart attack. Someone he hadn't seen in a long time, and sorely missed, was kicking a stone looking quite miffed. His hair was shorter, and the red makeup only reached halfway down his cheeks. He still had his nose piercing though. Jiraiya had been like a father to Naruto in the few short years they had spent together. When pain killed him, it hurt worse than anything he had felt in his life, until Hinata had died. He still had nightmares about the corpse that Tsunade had eventually found. Being his godson, He had to identify the body for good, and release it to be buried in the old Uchiha cemetery. The only one that wasn't marred by the destruction pain and Naruto's fight with the orange-haired puppet had caused. After a few painful seconds, his lungs demanded air, and Naruto sucked it in a little fast, choking on it, catching Minato and Jiraiya's attention. Naruto! I almost thought you were going to be late. Naruto smiled weakly at Minato's attempt at humor. As the pair of adults neared closer, Minato frowned. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Naruto broke his gaze away from Jiraiya and looked at Minato's matching blue ones. Sorry, I was just choking on some dust. So, who's this? Jiraiya's eyebrow rose slightly, before he smiled and broke out into a dance that the blonde hadn't seen in years. When he was finished, Minato's face was in his hands, and Naruto was laughing. Hey Gaki! Who are you laughing at? I'm the great Jiraiya. Minato interrupted the pair with a waving hand before Naruto could react, or laugh harder. Hey. Plenty of time to talk on the road. We've got to meet a team at the border in only 3 days. Naruto blew air out of his mouth. We can make it in a day if we really tried. Minato made a smug little sneer at him and said, Yeah, I know that. I also know that we have a second mission that I will debrief you on later that we have to save our energy for. Naruto just sighed loudly and started down the road, not looking forward to 3 days of walking. Minato ruffled the shorter blonde's hair as he passed him, earning a small and defeated-looking glare. When dusk had started to fall, the 3 men broke for camp. By the time light had totally left the sky, a stew pot was boiling with game and vegetables, and the men were sitting on logs around the fire. Jiraiya had just finished telling Naruto a story about Minato as a child that left the younger blonde in tears, and the older blonde with a red face hidden in his hands. When Naruto's laughter died to a quiet chuckle, Jiraiya poured himself a bowl of the stew and asked Minato a question that made him spit out his stew. So you banging that girl yet? Naruto protested loudly at the half-eaten chunks of meat and carrots that his brother spat all over his sleeping bag. Minato wiped his mouth and shot his teacher a glare that was colder than the deepest pits of hell. What? I'm just asking, Jiraiya said, holding in some laughter. Naruto, who had used a small wind jutsu to clear the stew off of his sleeping bag, turned his head towards the older man. What girl? I haven't seen him with anyone since I got here. His eyes flickered towards his brother. Minato's face got redder. There is no girl. Sensei likes to joke about this girl I used to know in academy. I haven't even talked to her in like 3 years. She's on some extended mission, I think. Jiraiya clicked his tongue, but didn't say anything else. Naruto opened his mouth to pry more, but a pointed look from Minato shut him up. Well, since poor little Minato doesn't want to talk about his fiery girlfriend, how about you tell me about yourself, Gaki? Minato hasn't told me very much. Naruto bit his lip. Jiraiya from his time had been really good at telling when the blonde was lying to him. He'd lived by his background story for the better part of 2 years now and had gotten it down pat, but something about lying to Jiraiya, the man who had been the closest thing to a father he had, unsettled Naruto's stomach. What's he told you? Naruto asked, glancing at the blonde beside him. Minato frowned slightly. Jiraiya shrugged. That they found you mangled up on the academy yards with nothing but scraps of clothes on you and no memory, apparently. The old man also told me that you died after releasing something that felt incredibly evil, and if it wasn't for the nurse in the hall beside your room, you would have stayed dead. I also want you to know that you are still being watched, and reported on. Naruto paled a little and Minato looked guilty. What? You knew that I was assigned to watch you and report on you. Mostly it's just how you are doing physically and mentally. Hokage-sama doubts you are a spy, but he, as well as I, is still curious as to where you came from. You sure you don't remember? Naruto shrugged. He knew he shouldn't have felt as miffed as he did about being watched, since as Minato said, he did know. I remember parts of it, but I don't know where it is. I wouldn't have the first idea as to how I would go about getting back. I still don't remember what happened to me. So what do you remember? Naruto shrugged again. I was poor. I lived mostly on the streets until I was old enough to build myself a little shack. Almost the truth. His old apartment he had was little better than a shack. I had a few friends, the ones whose parents didn't tell them to stay away from, or the rebellious ones. But Naruto frowned. Sakura's glassy eyes flashed before his vision. He hadn't actually seen Hinata's body after she'd died. Niji wouldn't let him near it. Jiraiya frowned. He knew that look. Well, what about training? Your chakra system is much more developed than someone who just started training a couple of years ago. Sometimes ninja would stop in our town. We had a pub with some beds for travelers. Sometimes the nicer ones would teach us things to practice our chakras, and sometimes the meaner ones would teach us things that were dangerous. A little boy managed to blow his arm off doing one of that bastard's practices. Minato winced. He hadn't heard that before. Jiraiya frowned. Something was off with the stories, but he wasn't sure what yet. That's pretty much it. I trained with the other kids my age until whatever happened brought me here. And I think I'm pretty good if I don't say so myself. Minato snorted. Yeah, right. You'd still be tripping over your own feet if it weren't for my exercises, you ungrateful little brat. Naruto feigned an overdramatic display of hurt, before both blondes broke into laugh. Jiraiya grinned, but his thoughts raced through his head at a mile a minute. And Sensei confirmed that you guys are actually related? Minato nodded. It had been one of the best days of his life. Family was something he had yearned for as a child. His memories of his parents were vague and full of an urgency that still woke him up in a cold sweat on particular bad nights. Yes, he had samples of our blood compared, and he matched mine 50%. So unless I was a very lucky 5-year-old, this kid's my little brother, full blood. He roughed Naruto's hair up. Normally the younger blonde would have protested, but the pensive look on Jiraiya's face told him that the older man was thinking about things Naruto would rather he not. I've heard the theory that Sensei me about your parents. What I find so hard to believe was that after all these years, and especially with the beginning of the tensions between us and IWA, that your long-lost little brother just lands on your lap out of nowhere. Minato pursed his lips. Naruto knew that the older blonde spent a lot of time wondering and looking for signs that he was an IWA sleeper agent. It is hard to believe, but it's what I believe. Naruto has shown nothing but loyalty to Konoha. I don't want to have you talking down to him, Sensei. I have no doubt at all for his intentions. And besides, we all know that if Naruto-kun does turn out to be a sleeper agent, I'll be the first to strike him down. Naruto gulped, and Jiraiya gave him a long hard stare. It was hard not to squirm, but he held the older man's stare until Jiraiya finally broke it with a laugh. Well, I have to admit, he's got guts. Both Naruto and Minato relaxed visibly. Minato nudged his brother and said quietly, I think it's time we all went to bed. We have a lot of traveling to do tomorrow. Naruto nodded and didn't protest the early retiring. He doubted he would sleep much that night. Not very much got past the to-be legendary Sannin, and Naruto knew that would not be the last batch of questions that he would have to endure in the future. But for now, he'd have to make do. The sun was barely peeking over the tops of the lush treetops when a few birds squawked loudly in protest and surprise. They flapped their brightly colored wings to keep their balance as the branch they had been sleeping on shook vigorously. They vaguely registered the dark green blur that passed them by, but their small bird brains were quickly turned back to preening the morning dew that had collected on their backs. Minato shot a look at Naruto after the birds' squawking had subsided. Naruto just tightened his lips. He opened his mouth to tell Minato off, but his jaw clicked shut as soon as he inhaled. Smoke. Definitely smoke. Tapping his nose, Minato focused a little extra chakra to his and his eyes widened in response. The trio of ninjas were but minutes away from the Border Patrol's main camp. Normally smoke was to be expected since the main camp was a permanent structure, and the border reports all stopped here to be reviewed before being sent back to the Hokage. A campfire or two was always running for light, warmth, and food. As the trio climbed higher to the treetops, the prickling on the back of Naruto's neck became apparent. The top of the fire that consumed nearly the entire camp could be seen over the top of the trees, and the amount of smoke that was being produced was starting to be blown their way. Jiraiya was the first one to land at the outskirts of the camp, his Geta sandals kicking up dust. As Naruto landed, Jiraiya smashed his foot down, digging the 2 slats of wood on his sandal into the dirt up to the sole of his foot. I can sense 4 life forms. All weak, only 1 is moving. 2 are in the middle of the main building, 2nd floor. 1 is around back, crawling towards the trees, 1 is in the basement. Minato nodded and said, I'll take the 1 in the basement. Naruto, you take the 1 getting away. Before Naruto could protest, Minato was dashing into the building, tying a cloth around his face, followed closely by Jiraiya and his dirty sandal. Naruto sighed before setting his sights on the back of the building. The lower part of the 2nd unit, that looked like it had been built directly onto the 1st unit, had already collapsed. Naruto grimaced when he saw a blackened hand sticking out from under a large beam. A groan of pain directed his eyesight to a man desperately trying to crawl away. The clothing on his back had been burned off, and his back was a blistering mess of blackened skin and oozing red areas. Naruto winced. He debated knocking the man out first to ease his pain. The man nearly screamed when Naruto made his presence known. The blonde put his hands up in front of him to show that he was friendly and said, I'm a ninja from Konoha, I'm here to help. The man nearly collapsed. You have to get away, he rasped. Naruto noticed that the man's hands were covered in splinters and his fingernails were broken and falling off. He had evidently been locked in somewhere and had clawed his way out. It's okay, don't talk. I'm going to make you sleep so it doesn't hurt so much when I move you away from the fire. Okay? The man's eyes became more frantic. No. You don't understand. A bomb. Any minute. In the basement. Naruto swiveled around and stared at the building. If anything, it seemed the fire had gotten bigger and more intense. Worst of all, he saw no movement, signifying Minato or Jiraiya's presence. Shit, he said, applying a quick sleep jutsu on the man. The man collapsed and he apologized before hoisting him up on his shoulders, audibly cracking some of the burnt skin on his back. Jogging as fast as he could, carrying a man who probably weighed about 90 kilos, he deposited him a safe distance away from the fire and, regardless of the flames, smashed right through the first-floor window. It had seemed like a good idea at first, a dynamic entry complete with glass flying everywhere. If only his friends could see him now. Especially Kiba, he would have thought that to have been badass. Naruto smashed into an already weak-looking pillar and snapped the thing in half. The corner of the ceiling groaned loudly before collapsing. Naruto managed to scamper and dive into the trapdoor left open by Minato just as rest of the floor came crashing down on top of him. He heard Jiraiya shout something, but paid it no heed. The basement was more like a cellar than anything. The walls were merely dirt scraped out with roots being utilized as shelves, and in one corner a chair had been carved out of a particularly large branch. Stacks and stacks of paperwork-filled filing boxes filled the room. Some of the stacks reached the low ceiling, a few of them were on fire, lighting the room with a dim glow. Minato wasn't in the room, and neither were any living bodies. One corpse he saw, shoved into a pile of paper, was covered in blood, and a closer glance showed that his throat had been cut. Naruto's lips pursed. A quiet tumbling sound turned his attention to the far corner, farthest away from the now covered in burning debris trapdoor. A hole, big enough for two people to crawl through, was being dug. Relief trickled through his chest like a stream of cold water, cooling his mind in the intense heat the fire was creating. The bomb was obvious. It was sitting on the old desk in the corner by the root chair. Whoever had built it even had the courtesy to add a timer to it. Naruto watched in horror as it passed the 30-second mark, and scrambled into the hole. If Minato hadn't disabled it by now, it meant that he felt there was not enough time. He felt slightly foolish for coming down here to rescue someone he knew perfectly able to handle himself, but he pushed down the feeling. "An-I-san," he shouted. There was no light in this tunnel for him to see. With Kyuubi gone, he couldn't see in the dark as well. "Naruto? What the hell are you doing in here? I thought you were supposed to be grabbing the guy around back." Naruto heard the digging of whatever jutsu Minato was using stop. "The guy told me there was a bomb." Naruto was sure that if he could see, Minato would have been giving him a well-done look, but instead the older blonde just shouted. "Of course there is a bomb. That's why I'm digging." Naruto backed out of the tunnel as fast as he could and glanced at the clock. 20 seconds. Practically running on all fours, Naruto scrambled on top of the injured man Minato was dragging, and ignoring Minato's protests, he scrambled on top of the future fourth Hokage. No time. Taking advantage of the dark, and pushing down the regret he knew he'd feel for doing this, he formed a large swirl of chakra, pushing it together and making it spin at greater speeds until it was the size of a large watermelon. Biting back the technique's name, he pushed both of his hands into the dirt in a vaguely up direction. Instead of drilling through the dirt like he expected when he performed the Rasengan on trees, everything just seemed to explode in front of him. At first Naruto thought the bomb went off, but when he saw the light of the fire behind him, he realized that Minato had dug closer to the top than he had thought. Looking behind him, he swore loudly. Minato was slumped over. A large scrape was beginning to bleed all over his forehead. Grabbing his brother, Naruto heaved him as far as his chakra, which was almost used up from the sloppily made Otama Rasengan, would let him. Minato landed about 20 feet away on his side, rolling a few times before stopping. He started to move, signaling to Naruto that the hit to his head from before couldn't have been that bad. The injured man below him was next. Fortunately for Naruto, this man turned out to be young. Maybe 14. Young meant small and light, which meant that Naruto barely had to use his chakra to throw him out of the hole. The teen's landing was softened by Minato, who grunted when the body hit him. His eyes flew open and made contact with Naruto's just as Naruto was hoisting himself out of the hole. Naruto got his body free, which had been mostly buried in loose soil from his quick dig, when a sharp pain throbbed up his leg. Twisting it around, he realized that his foot was pinned in between two rocks large enough for him to not even be able to budge them. Things just weren't going good for the young blonde. He looked up in surprise and fear, making eye contact with Minato before a deafening blast shook him to his very soul. The earth seemed to move underneath him like a wave, before he felt himself being thrown forward and smashed around like a rag doll. Either something large and solid collided with his head, or his head collided with something large and solid, but his vision and every other sense he had blinked out. Minato straightened his back out. He had crouched over the teen's body, an instinct after he heard the blast from the bomb go off. The shock on Naruto's face had been enough to completely wipe the mist that had been floating around his vision. Taking a split second to make sure the teen wasn't in any immediate danger from falling objects, which seemed rather redundant when Minato realized that the bomb had taken out the building almost completely, Minato was on his feet in a flash, calling out Naruto's name. Jiraiya stood up, pushing a plank off of his back, saying something to one of the two ninja he had successfully gotten out of the building, mere seconds before the blast detonated. Minato quickly spotted Naruto. The blast had thrown him up into the middle of a nearby tree trunk, cracking the tree, and Naruto had tumbled down to the base and was by all means unconscious. Minato, running so fast that one of the surviving ninjas that Jiraiya had saved would say that he appeared to be a yellow flash, was down on his knees at Naruto's side checking his pulse. When the steady lube-dub made itself present after a few seconds of frantic pressing into the blonde's neck, Minato's shoulders relaxed. He gave the blonde a quick check over, and was relieved to find the only injuries were a few minor burns, scrapes, and bruises. Shaking Naruto's shoulder was the only thing needed to awake him. "Ugh. Did we make it?" Naruto said, after sitting up, holding a hand to the bruise that was already darkening on his forehead. "Yeah, we did. Come on, let's get the survivors somewhere safe and clean ourselves up." Naruto nodded, and after blinking a few times to clear his vision, he plodded over to where he had put the burnt man, still sleeping, safe and sound behind a tree. Naruto sat with Jiraiya, helping him tend to the four shinobi's wounds. Minato had the most chakra left, so he was designated to putting out the fire before it spread to the forest. He also summoned a messenger frog to inform the Hokage of what had happened. Jiraiya didn't say anything to Naruto until he was finished treating the man with the worst wounds. Naruto watched as Jiraiya slathered an ointment on the back of the man that the youngest blonde had rescued. The forced sleep jutsu was still in place, something Naruto was glad for. The man wasn't even twitching in pain, and Naruto already felt like throwing up from the mere sight of the flaking and burnt skin. When Jiraiya had finished wrapping gauze around the man's entire torso, he turned to Naruto and said, "Look very closely at this man. You saw his wounds, now look at his physical appearance. What do you see?" Naruto said. The man's clothes were burned around the edges of the wound, but were relatively undamaged everywhere else, save the soles of his shoes being melted. There was no bruising, as would be apparent from a pillar falling on his back. It looks like he was shot in the back with a fire jutsu? There isn't any bruising on his shoulders." "Did you notice anything else that seemed odd?" Jiraiya asked, pulling the gauze from a bag he unsealed from a scroll. He bent down to tenderly tend the only woman in the group's burn arm. 2 of her fingers were missing from the hand that Jiraiya held, the stubs had been cauterized closed. "Well, the bottoms of his sandals are melted. But that could have been from running on the fire, right? His fingernails are all ripped to pieces too. Locked in a room?" Jiraiya didn't answer Naruto until he had finished delicately wrapping the woman's hands, only garnering slight wincing from the woman. "The bottoms of his sandals are melted, sure, but why would sticks and rocks be sealed into the plastic if he was running on burning wood? Surely it would be charcoal, right?" Naruto glanced at the man's shoes before shrugging. "So what do you think? Whoever attacked him burned his feet as well?" Jiraiya rolled his eyes. "He was struck by lightning, you brat." Naruto made an O with his mouth and said, "Do you think this was the work of Kumo?" The woman whose hand Jiraiya had just finished wrapping up said through pain-clenched teeth. "No, they were definitely IWA. One of them could call down lightning. It's not that unusual." Jiraiya tossed Naruto a roll of gauze and directed him to wrap up any burns that had blisters on the fourth man, who had barely suffered any burns, but sported a nasty gash that streaked down the side of his face from his forehead to his chin. It had already crusted up, indicating that he had probably been taken out early in the fight. Naruto just finished tying the last knot when Minato arrived, a sheen of sweat coating his face glinting in the morning sun. Letting out a breath and sat down and crossed his legs. "All right. The fire's out and the ashes are smoldered. I think it's time for some questions. Miss, I noticed you seem to be able to talk. Maybe you can tell us what happened? Also, if you could tell me what happened to the squad that was supposed to have arrived last night?" Naruto noted the hesitation in his older brother's voice when he asked the second question. The woman flexed her arm a little and gritted her teeth. It was a surprise attack, although how a squad of stupid rock neens got the jump on us is beyond me. It makes me want to go home and train until the rest of my fingers fall off. I am ashamed. She gritted her teeth again and let Jiraiya help her into a sitting position, with her back resting against his chest, of course. Injured or not, he wasn't about to let a sexy lady go unsupported. A thunderous crash was all the warning we got. It was at about midnight, not 10 minutes after the relief squad arrived. One of their own was injured from the journey here, and so they were busy tending to her. Can I ask you to stop petting my hair, please? Minato and Naruto both gave Jiraiya a flat stare, and the older man clicked his tongue and put his hand back on her shoulder to support her. Thank you? As I was out saying, we thought that the place had actually been struck by lightning. The top corner of the main unit was on fire, and the supervisor had been struck dead. We were alerted to this by one of the younger Chunin's shouts. After that, it was all a blur. They swarmed in from everywhere it seemed. I counted at least 8 different shinobi, but they all had the IWA insignia showing. We tried to fight them off, but they took us by surprise, and had locked a few of us in the only room with no windows. Some kind of seal had been placed on the walls or something because it felt like my chakra had been plugged up. I think it was Toji who managed to punch and scrape his way through the hinges on the door. We got out and more than half of us were hit by something. Probably rocks, they felt pretty hard. The next thing I knew, Jiraiya-sama was lifting a plank off of his back, and saying something that I don't quite remember. I was just welcoming you back to the world of the living, Jiraiya said, avoiding Minato's irritated stare. Can you tell me how many of our ninja were here when IWA attacked? A few of the bodies are a bit charred, Minato said gently. The woman bit her lip and gave it a good thought. There was the supervisor, my squad of 4, and the midnight squad. They had I believe it was 3. So that makes 8 of us. Minato nodded and stood up, signaling for Naruto to do the same. Naruto dusted off his pants and stepped back. Sensei, please let this woman sleep. It's obvious she's in pain, and I know we don't really have anything that would help. Jiraiya nodded and pressed 3 of his fingers to her forehead. The woman's eyes fluttered before her head lolled to the side. He gently put her down and joined the brothers as they walked back to the ruins of the building. So what do we do about the secondary mission that you never bothered to tell me about? Naruto asked. Minato grimaced. We count and identify the bodies as best we can. As far as I can tell, the mission is over, and since it was A-class, you don't need to know. The younger blonde gave a small pout, but when it came to official rules, Minato was about as easy to bend as a cement pole. The first 2 bodies were easy to find, and would be relatively easy to identify. Their faces were mostly intact, and one of them even had what looked like his wife or girlfriend's photo in his pocket. The third body they came across was charred almost beyond recognition. It was the one that Naruto had seen shortly before being blown up. The only thing that hadn't been completely destroyed by the fire was an amulet made of a semi-precious stone clutched in the figure's left hand. They spent 4 hours poking through every nook and cranny in the wreckage and around the encampment in the woods looking for the 4th and final body, but it was nowhere to be found. Minato became visibly more agitated the longer the search went on. Naruto decided to intervene before he started tearing out his hair. What's wrong? You're starting to get a bald spot from the hair you've been pulling out. Minato quickly rubbed his hands over his head before glaring at Naruto. The last body. It's not here. I think the IWA took her with them, which proves this was a planned attack, and not one of the random border attacks that IWA has been testing their luck with. Naruto kicked a plank over. What makes you think it's a she? What about the body back there? Minato shook his head and gave his teacher a look. Jiraiya's eyes hardened and Naruto's became more confused. What's going on? He asked. Minato swore and Jiraiya summoned a frog that Naruto knew was the fastest he could summon. Gamakusaku, I need you to tell the old man that they've taken the habanero, and we are in pursuit. Tell him we have 4 injured, 1 critical, and 3 dead. Gamakusaku nodded, and with a ribbit the 5-foot-tall frog hopped once, and was across the meadow so fast that several trees were uprooted in the back wind. Naruto had to hold on to Minato to avoid being sucked up with them. Minato, however, was miles away. His attention was focused northwest. His fists tightened, and his eyes looked harder and colder than Naruto could have ever imagined. He had no idea what was going on, or who this habanero was, but it was bringing out the rage deep inside Minato, and Naruto was sure that IWA would pay its fair share in blood. Naruto was pretty damn sure that he had never lasted this long without speaking in his life. It wasn't in his nature to not prattle on. The blonde suspected that it was a fear of the quiet and loneliness he had been subjected to his entire childhood, but he wasn't about to admit that to anyone. The past 6.5 hours were tortuous. After Jiraiya had sent his toad towards Konoha, Minato had just leapt away without a single word, leaving Naruto and Jiraiya to quickly gather the supplies and scramble after him. Naruto almost asked questions many times, but the looks and the mood that Minato had been putting off kept his mouth shut. After the first few hours he gave up and started to conserve strength. He didn't have Kyuubi anymore and his stamina was nowhere near the boundless well that it had once been. However, the blonde was certainly proud that even with a body that was only 14 years old, his stamina and chakra reserves would still rival most jounin, but Naruto doubted that even a jounin could keep Minato's pace for very much longer. By the time Minato had just suddenly stopped, even Jiraiya's cheeks were starting to look a little red. Minato, on the other hand, just looked angry. Angry and worried. In his hand he held several pieces of long red hair that Naruto hadn't noticed him holding before. Flopping over onto the grass, uncaring of the small rocks poking into his back, he tried not to throw up from the sheer amount of exercise he had been put through. Jiraiya handed him a canteen wordlessly, and caught the slightly guilty look that passed over Minato's face. The taller blonde glanced up at the sky and said, "It's just after midday. We will wait until evening before we raid their camp." Naruto piped up for the first time in over 6 hours. "Okay. Sure, no problem. As fun as it sounds raiding a camp that is no doubt filled to the brim with foreign ninja, I would kindly like to know why I just ran halfway across the freaking continent." Minato glanced at Jiraiya, only to wilt slightly under his teacher's disapproving glare. The jounin set his bag down on the slightly damp grass before sitting down himself. He could feel the familiar wear of chakra drain starting to creep up on him. A good meal and some rest before tonight would do him a world of wonders. "The Bloody Habanero is a nickname for a friend of mine. She's been kidnapped before, almost exactly like this." Minato held up his hand and Naruto saw a few strands of long red hair dangling from them. "Last time she pulled out strands of hair infused with chakra for someone to follow. I managed to get her back in less than 6 hours that time. This time, however, I only found 3 strands, and they stopped 4 hours ago." Naruto shifted, mindlessly helping Jiraiya set up camp now that he had caught his breath. "How do you know where we are going?" he asked. Minato turned his head to face roughly north. "I was keeping us a fair distance behind them. If I focus really hard, I can feel her chakra from here. The camp is only about a kilometer away from here." Minato rubbed his hair in frustration. "Sometimes I wish I was stupid and not so logical. If I was like that, I'd have plowed through that camp already." Naruto raised an eyebrow. Minato caught the look and frowned. "What?" Naruto shrugged and said. "And I-san, are you sure you aren't banging her?" Minato threw his bag at the shorter blonde, but Naruto was ready for it. With a loud laugh he ducked and caught the bag, swinging it around before gently placing it on the ground. He unclipped the bag and pulled out a collapsible pot. Jiraiya had started a smokeless fire already, and like a well-oiled team, the two set up water to be boiled in less than a minute flat. Minato was impressed. It was like they knew each other already. After their simple meal of rehydrated jerky was simmering, Jiraiya finally asked the question that Naruto had hoped he wouldn't have had to ask. "So, what's the plan?" Kushina sniffed sharply, trying to sound severe, but instead sounded more like she had a cold. Her nose had been completely and painfully smashed in when she had decided to let her temper get the better of her and spit in the leader's eye. She sat awkwardly tied to a post in a small tent in the middle of the camp that the IWA Nin had set up. There were 14 of them total, a rather impressive number for just a single kidnapping. At least 5 of them were jounin too. Kushina almost felt smug. Shifting her weight to relieve the pins and needles in her legs, she grunted as her jaw clicked and sent vibrations through her nose area. Blood had soaked her chin and the front of her beige jacket. Her hair was all tangled and roughly tied up after one of the younger Nin had gotten fed up with it getting in his face as he marched her onwards. With her left eye completely swollen shut, it was harder to judge, but the redhead was pretty sure that the sun was starting to set. She gave a small, but decidedly devious grin. Almost time to start escaping. The IWA Nin were on the point of celebrating. Not only had they kidnapped their prize, they had successfully destroyed one of the many permanent guard camps that circled the official territory border of Konohagakure. To top it off, there was no chance of anyone finding it for hours, leaving them to escape home free. Their evening meal was taken with smiles, but no alcohol was going to be passed around until they were finished with their mission. They may be arrogant, but they were not stupid. The little redhead had put up a fair fight, knocking out a total of 24 teeth from 11 of the 14 ninja, and 4 of them bore bald spots from her ripping large chunks out with her bare hands. The camp was set up in a small clearing in the middle of the woods. They were just past the ridiculously easy-to-pass borders of the fire country, and into the neutral grass country. Kusa usually consisted of rolling and gentle hills, but in some areas the lush forests of the fire country spilled over the borders. The IWA that has picked this particular area to break camp chose it because of this reason, and because after a few long weeks of studying the passes that both Kusa and Konoha ninja made of their respective countries' borders, it was the least likely place to be spotted, and if they had to be spotted, it was mostly likely going to be by Kusa, whom they held a neutral trade treaty with. Few of the fellow campers even stopped to think of the hours of preparation that the particular ninja put into the camp, but those that did raised their canteens of water in appreciation. Their kage had assured them that capturing this woman would ensure their eventual domination of Konoha and the fertile lands of fire. So naturally, when the muffled sniffles and shuffling of a pair of feet that weren't even trying to hide their presence were heard in the woods around the camp, all 14 of the ninja froze. You could hear a pin drop. Another sniffle, closer and more frantic sounding, and the entire camp, still silent save for the fluttering of tent fabric, was a blur of motion, and the ninja armed themselves and stashed their equipment in easy-to-reach places in case they had to leave in a rush. The fire was smothered with a bucket of dirt and a small hiss. It was still twilight, so visibility wasn't hindered too much, and in the case of 2 of the shinobi there, wasn't hindered at all. Kushina snapped her head up when the low buzz of conversation and celebration stopped suddenly. She had almost managed to get one of her wrists out of one of the numerous knots and binds by dislocating her thumb. She thanked whoever was watching for her that her left thumb was double-jointed. Concentrating for any sounds she felt, rather than heard the sudden pickup of motion in the camp. This set off alarms in her head. With a sharp jerk and a grimace, Kushina popped her hand free and slid her thumb back into place. Whatever was going on out there probably wasn't anything good for her, so she quickly turned to her other hand and began loosening the knots as fast as she could. The object of the sniffling and loud shuffling through the undergrowth of the sparse forest turned the last corner. She choked on a half-sob and froze as she found herself facing a camp full of IWA nin. Her red swollen eyes widened and her breath hitched as she turned to scamper back from where she came from. This was just not her night. Before she even made a full turn, she was grabbed and restrained by 4 of the shinobi, one of which slapped his hand over her mouth before she had the chance to make a noise. Dragging her back to the camp, 6 of the nin quickly and silently swept the area around for a few kilometers, but found nothing. "Who are you?" The woman looked up at the commander's surprisingly soft tone. Her sobs had degraded into hiccups a few minutes previous, and after the sweep had come up clean, the fire had been relit and celebrations, although a bit warier than before, resumed. The woman rubbed her eyes with her dirty shirt and said, "Why Yoko? Dewadaka Yoko." The commander, along with his second and third in command, all sat around a second, smaller fire. Yoko was restrained with a simple piece of rope. Having next to no chakra and an unused system, she had been deemed no threat, but precautions were always taken. "All right, Yoko-san, what are you doing here?" Yoko looked away as tears started to form in her eyes. "I'm being chased." The third in command shifted uncomfortably. This woman looked uncannily similar to his sister back home, and he couldn't stand it when she cried. The first in command recognized the look of fear in the woman's eyes, and the bruises on her exposed arms and neck. The woman looked up and saw where they were staying and hugged herself in an attempt to cover them up with her bound hands. "Please, are you shinobi? Can you help me reach Taka?" No one spoke and Yoko's eyes turned desperate. "Please! I can pay! I'll do anything to get away from, please! Anything!" She had scrunched her eyes shut and dropped to the ground in the low bow. Her hands were scrunched together and held up in a pleading gesture. The commander didn't say anything. He glanced at the second and third before sighing. The third moved to woman's side. He pulled her up so she wasn't groveling in the dirt. "Commander, I'm sure one of the younger ones would be happy to escort her to Taka." The woman turned her blue eyes back to the commander and looked him straight in the eye. The commander fought well and lasted well over a minute, but in the end, even he couldn't stand the look of utter defeat that she was putting out. He sighed loudly and tiredly, rubbing his cheek. "Only if you can find a volunteer, a chunin preferably. I want her gone by midnight. We won't be staying here too much longer anyway." The woman laughed and rushed in to give the commander a hug after the third untied the rope. "Thank you so much. I will never forget what IWA has done for me." The commander patted her back awkwardly before pushing her away. "See to it that she gets something to eat and perhaps a spare shirt with sleeves. It's cold out tonight." The third saluted before the woman hugged him as well. The commander shook his head as he watched the woman move towards the larger group of shinobi still celebrating. "That was a good thing you did, Commander. 14 ninja for one Konoha scum was a little overkill anyway." The commander glanced up at the second with a frown, but didn't say anything. Kushina shook her wrist to get the blood flowing again. It had taken her nearly 15 minutes to untie the mess of knots that she was sure was overkill. A guard had come in to check on her once, sending her heart into a frenzy against her chest, but he had neglected to look behind her at the bindings, and instead sneered at her and called her scum. Kushina had snorted at the time. He was the one whose head she had pulled a full handful of hair from, and as she recalled, he screamed like a girl afterwards about it. A rustle from outside the tent behind her made her heart jump to her throat. She thrust her hands back behind her and tried to calm her poor heart before she went into cardiac arrest. Agonizing seconds passed before Kushina let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Nothing. Someone must have been grabbing one of the bags piled against the back of the tent. So naturally, when a cold hand clamped down over her mouth, Kushina didn't even think and bit down as hard as she possibly could. She felt the arm belonging to the hand stiffen, but remain where it was. Despite the blood she could taste in her mouth, the voice didn't scream or make any noise other than a short grunt. After a second she realized that she hadn't been stricken, and spat the dirty and bloody hand out. A blonde head peered around to face her. Elation rose in her chest until she got a good look at his face. "Who the hell are you?" she whispered. The blonde totally ignored his bloody hand and gave her a sly wink. "We're here to rescue you." He brandished his kunai and leant towards Kushina's hands until she pulled them out and held them up. "What the fuck took so long?" Naruto Simple raised an eyebrow before quickly sawing through the binds that went halfway up each of her calves. When he was done, Kushina stood up with a wobble, grabbing onto Naruto's shoulder. "Okay, you'll be about a kilometer away in a few seconds, so don't scream. We need the element of surprise." Kushina blinked as Naruto whipped out a large three-pronged kunai. It had a seal wrapped around the hilt. Putting a finger to his lips, he threw the kunai down, and in a bright flash of light Minato stood in the tent in all of his blonde glory. Kushina only had time to whisper his name before he grabbed her arm, and in a flash they were gone. Naruto blinked, trying to rid his eyes of the white dots. He summoned a Kage Bunshin and had it transform into a pile of ropes. Gripping Minato's special kunai in his hands, he settled his feet into the loose stance that his brother had been teaching him for the past 2 years and waited for the flood that was sure to come. This was going to be fun. Yoko was sitting around the fire, chatting quite animatedly with some of the younger Chunin and Jounin when a bright yellow flash filled the entire campsite. It had seemed to emanate from a tent in the middle of the camp. Everything went still for a short moment before exploding into action. Most of the shinobi rushed towards the tent, while a few stood back and formed a small defense around her. Worry twisted in her gut. However, when a second flash of yellow went off, all of her worry disappeared and a feral grin stretched across her face. She took the kunai that the youngest ninja there, a 15-year-old Chunin, had given her when the first flash went off, and drove it into the back of his head. He dropped like a sack of potatoes. The nin standing next to him got a chakra spike punch to the face that probably knocked the rest of his teeth out. Shaking her hand, she lurched forward as one of the smaller nin jumped on her back in an attempt to knock her down. Scrunching her eyes up, she released the chakra dampener and the hen she had on. When the smaller nin saw that the short woman he had jumped onto turned into a tall man with a fierce grin, all he could do was let out a squeak. Jiraiya straightened his back before dispatching the small nin with a quick jab to the throat. The tent that had contained Kushina exploded, sending IWA nin flying and screaming. By now, the camp was in almost total chaos. Another yellow flash blinded the camp and men started falling left and right. The few that Jiraiya had not managed to get a good enough grip on to stick a small sealed paper onto were left screaming and trying to run away. A slash of wind cut through 3 tents before gruesomely severing a fleeing IWA nin. Jiraiya pulled the kunai out of the back of his first victim's head. His own head snapped up when he heard Naruto's familiar shout. This was no time to worry about the blonde. They had vermin to exterminate. Minato had killed or maimed the sealed targets, and was now working on the rest of them. Jiraiya saw him force a mishmash of pure chakra into the gut of a man who was missing quite a bit of hair from his head and managed a whistle as the rough sphere in his hand exploded, ripping the man's midsection to pieces. The tall white-haired man whipped around to kill whomever was behind him, but stopped himself short when he saw it was Naruto, covered in blood and holding his side, but otherwise intact. He was smiling grimly. "Ah, the fighting's over. That was quick. You okay, Gaki?" "Don't call me Gaki, old man." Jiraiya scoffed, but inspected the boy, who was now seated on one of the long logs that the IWA nin had pulled up around the still burning fire. "Ah, that's a nasty gash you got there. But it's not deep, you'll live. Besides, chicks dig scars." Naruto rolled his eyes and pressed his ruined jacket back against his side. Minato approached the pair, holding his right arm, wincing every time he jostled it. "Can you two pile everything in the middle and burn it? I need to go check on Kushina. We'll set up camp at the spot we discussed." Naruto saluted and Jiraiya gave Minato's arm a glance before nodding. He'd deal with his foolhardy student later. Instead, he slapped his hand, rather painfully as Naruto would add later, onto Naruto's back and gave a laugh. Alright, Gaki, time for the real work to start. Naruto smiled and gave a small painful laugh. It really was just like old times. Kushina sat on a fallen log, rubbing her bruised and raw wrists, and staring absent-mindedly at the leaves of the trees as they swayed in the wind. A particularly strong gust raised goosebumps on her arm, causing her to shiver and rub her upper arms. A bright flash of yellow light lit the entire clearing and made spots dance around in Kushina's eyes. Her heart leapt to her throat and the wistful look she was sporting was wiped off and replaced with a look of utter annoyance. Minato blinked a few times before crossing the small clearing and handing her a wet shirt. Kushina looked at Minato with confusion before slowly accepting the sodden shirt. Minato softly said, "Your face is covered in blood. I figured you might want to clean up a bit before the other two get back here." Kushina made an O with her mouth and thanked Minato timidly. She carefully dabbed at her face to loosen the dried blood before slowly and tenderly wiping off what she could. Minato was pulling out what looked like ration bars, jerky, and the standard black shirt and pants that all shinobi ranked chunin and above were issued. When Kushina had finished, he took the sodden shirt and handed her the clean clothes without speaking. Kushina was starting to worry at his lack of speech, but dismissed it as exhaustion from the rescue. Kushina was not a shy person. In fact, most people would willingly call her the loudest and most outgoing person that Konoha had seen since Jiraiya was a child. She generally had no qualms about stripping down to her undergarments in front of teammates to change clothes quickly, but something about Minato seeing her that nude made her heart stumble and her face match her hair. So she found herself clutching the bundle of clothes to her chest and hiding behind some trees as she slowly lifted her now ruined yellow shirt over her head. Minato's face took on a small tinge of rose as he heard Kushina changing not 20 feet behind him. Her long absence from Konoha had changed her a lot more than he had thought it would, and he barely got a good look at her. Minato was of average height, about 5 feet 11 inches, and he had been that height since he was 15. The last time he saw Kushina, the top of her head barely went over his shoulders, and now it looked like she could scrape the bottom of his nose. He also noticed that in the 3 years she had been gone, she had gotten noticeably toner, losing most of the roundness in her face that she had been teased so mercilessly for as a child. Footsteps and the rustling of bushes signaled that she was done, and Minato turned around. His clothes were too big, of course, but something about her and his clothes looked utterly ridiculous and adorable at the same time. A snort made its way out of his nose and Kushina sent him a glare dripping with acid. Minato sighed and sat down next to her, handing the jerky and ration bars that he had pulled out earlier. She hesitated until he said, "Eat. We ate just before we came to get you, so don't worry about us." Kushina nodded and mumbled a thanks. Minato watched her face with amusement as she made various faces to the taste of the foods, but continued to frown in her general direction. Finally, after she managed to swallow the last of the cardboard the hospital called ration bars, she spoke up for the first time since she had seen Minato. "Is there something on my face?" Minato blinked, apparently stunned that she had spoken. Kushina lifted a brow and crossed her arms. Minato rubbed the back of his neck and grinned embarrassedly. "Was I staring?" Kushina nodded pointedly and Minato continued. "Sorry, and to answer your question, you still have blood all over your face, but I don't think you'll be able to get it all off until you take a bath or something, so don't worry." Kushina groaned and ran her fingers across her cheeks, feeling the leftover grit of dried blood. Her left eye still felt tender and swollen, but she could open her eyelid and see unfocused shapes now that it wasn't sealed shut with blood. Apparently there was a good-sized gash over her eyebrow as well. It had scabbed over, but Kushina honestly couldn't remember when that had happened. "Are you feeling okay, Minato?" Minato frowned and said, "Of course I am. What would make you think otherwise?" Concern ran across his face before he could stem it down, and Kushina sighed. She knew what was wrong now. "Listen. I am fine, okay? This isn't the first time I've been kidnapped, you know." Minato let out a long sigh, his shoulders drooped in relief. "Are you sure? You're really quiet, and to be frank, I've never seen you this hurt before." Kushina rolled her violet eyes. She wanted to feel special for the obvious concern and attention he was doting on her, but Kushina knew better. She knew he was a generally nice guy and would do this for anyone. She tucked the wrapper from the ration bar into one of the pockets in the overly large pants, and pulled her old clothes onto her lap to check them over for holes and rips. Minato jumped when he heard the bushes behind them rustle. He hadn't realized that he had been focusing on Kushina so hard. He was drinking in everything from the way she held her hands, like that of a kunoichi used to quick and subtle movements, to the look of sadness and wisdom she held in her eyes. He had half a mind to ask her about the prolonged mission she had been on, but knew to give her time. She'd eventually talk. Jiraiya tried not to jostle the boy on his back, but every few steps he took was accompanied by a quiet grunt. The way the kid acted towards his injuries, With caution and the right ways to clean them quickly and on the go, it lent his backstory some belief. Well, more so than he and Sarutobi had initially taken it for. The sage sported a grin when he saw Minato making googly eyes at Kushina before the blonde heard them approach, and grinned even wider when Minato finally did hear them and was surprised in a way that no shinobi worth his 2 cents should be. He dropped the bag of supplies and other things that he and Naruto had looted off the IWA Nin before piling their bodies together and setting it ablaze. Despite being enemies, they were still soldiers taking orders and deserved a proper send-off. He saw Naruto close his eyes for a few seconds and move his lips in what he assumed a quick prayer before Jiraiya had noticed that his wound had opened again and the blonde was having difficulty walking. He squatted to let the boy climb onto his back rather than just toss him, something that Naruto found hilarious and embarrassing at the same time. The look that Minato sent Jiraiya's way was one of contempt as he rushed away from Kushina towards Naruto and helped him off Jiraiya's back. Naruto hissed and pressed the already blood-soaked and ruined jacket even harder to his side. Minato's mother-hen instinct kicked in, and it wasn't long before Naruto was threatening to hurt himself even further if the older blonde didn't lay off. Jiraiya just laughed and sat down beside Kushina. "So who's the kid?" Kushina asked, suspicions already forming. Jiraiya glanced at Minato, now settled down and focusing on stitching Naruto's side up. Naruto was wincing, but taking it rather well for a 14-year-old. Long story short, he's Minato's little brother who showed up 2 years ago after someone mangled him horribly and left him to die in a playground for all the nice shinobi children to see. Kushina didn't even blink. "Are you sure he's not well?" "A spy? A sleeper agent? Well, we can never be too sure. I just met the brat at the beginning of this mission, but I can definitely say that if he's a sleeper then he's damn good at getting people to like him." Jiraiya paused for a second. Minato was done stitching and was proceeding to dress the rest of his wounds. His blood tests proved positive towards being his brother, and his age is appropriate towards Minato's own origins before I found the runt. Kushina was staring at Naruto. Something about him seemed familiar almost. She wasn't sure what, but her eyes kept being drawn to the dark slashes down his cheeks, 3 on each side. She glanced back at Jiraiya for a moment before asking, "Where did he get those scars on his face from? Do you know?" Jiraiya just shook his head. "I'm going to do a basic scan of you, just to make sure there is no lasting damage. I know you will probably be fine in a few days, but I just want to make sure." Kushina flinched but nodded. Jiraiya's hand lit up in the medical green that Tsunade had pounded into him after her brother had died, determined to make sure no one she loved would die on her watch again. Jiraiya set his lips grim, remembering the look of utter hopelessness in her eyes the days following Dan's death. The white-haired man placed his hand on top of Kushina's feverishly warm forehead. He cast her a glance, but her eyes were screwed shut. The skin showed no signs of fever, so he figured it had something to do with the beast in her belly. Bruising almost everywhere, she'd be black and blue tomorrow, cuts and scrapes from fighting, rope burns on her wrists and from her ankles to her knees. Those would probably be gone in the morning. The most severe thing he could detect was the swollen eye and the broken nose. "Your nose is going to set crooked if you don't set it soon. Other than that, you'll be fine in a day or 2. Kushina sighed as Jiraiya removed his hand. She tenderly touched her nose and sucked a sharp breath in pain. "Is it really crooked?" she asked tentatively. She didn't want to have to touch her nose if she could help it. Not terribly. You just gonna leave it then?" Kushina nodded. She wasn't focused on beauty to get her by in the shinobi world. It wasn't needed in her specialty anyway. Running her hands through her hair, she winced at the knots and tangles and started to pick it apart. "Jiraiya-sensei, you wouldn't happen to have a brush, would you?" Jiraiya snorted but pulled a comb out from his pocket. Kushina smiled and started to work on the mess that was her hair. Naruto finally managed to convince Minato that he could finish the dressings himself. The older blonde's mother-henning tendencies were getting a little overbearing, and Naruto felt he had to be at least 10 feet away before he could start ignoring Minato watching his every little move. "I said I was fine. We need to start moving again, right?" "I'll be fine." Minato hovered a few moments more before resigning himself to tend to Kushina. Turns out she had similar ideas about him being overbearing. Jiraiya shook his head at his student before shoving the bag of loot into the lost-looking blonde's arms. "Take this, I'll take the gaki. Kushina-chan can take herself. We'll find shelter and discuss what we will do tomorrow. Got that?" Minato nodded slowly and ended up taking the rear position, feeling slightly helpless at his inability to help more, but able to sneak a few peeks at how nice Kushina's but looked from what he could see through the sweatpants. The sun was just beginning to set again when Jiraiya found a place deemed able to camp for the night. The first thing noticeable was the large rock that formed an overhang which protected them from the back and the top. The area surrounding the camp was covered in crunchy gravel which would alert them of approaching enemies. Jiraiya wasn't particularly worried if anyone find them though. He himself wasn't even sure of where they were. He'd have to use the stars to get back out to civilization. As soon as he gently set Naruto down, the boy was digging in his bag for food. They had been walking since before dawn and had only stopped for lunch. Everyone was tired and Kushina was starting to get a little snarky. Not that Minato noticed. Jiraiya saw him eyeing her rear a few times and chuckled at his favorite student. After Naruto had single-handedly set up a fire and started a pot of stew with some noodles and a packet of ramen flavoring, from his last cup of instant ramen, Minato put his hand to his chin. He had just finished setting up the tents when he realized something that was probably going to cause him a great amount of grief. He sat down around the fire as Naruto ladled out bowls of his stew/ramen concoction. He had discovered that Kushina's favorite food was ramen as well and the two were almost instant best friends. "Why the long face, Anai-san?" Naruto asked as he handed the older blonde a bowl. Minato looked up at Naruto and said, "Well, we only packed 2 tents, one for me and Naruto, and Jiraiya's." Naruto looked puzzled, Jiraiya looked delighted, and Kushina had a mixed look of embarrassment and horror. "So what are we going to do about this?" the redhead asked. She was struggling to prevent her face from matching her hair. She knew that the only tents that were usually used were 2-person tents. They were light, small, and in standard 4-person cells, only 2 were required. I don't know, I'd rather you decide actually." Kushina sent a half-hearted glare at Minato. She sighed heavily and pointed at Naruto who was serving Jiraiya. "Naruto, tonight you are sleeping with me." Naruto's face turned bright red and he nearly dropped Jiraiya's bowl. The white-haired man quickly grabbed it before the blonde ruined it, and sent Naruto a dirty look, and said, What?" Kushina sighed again before saying, "You have to share a tent with me tonight, or you're sleeping under the stars." She looked up at the darkening sky. "It looks like it's going to rain tonight, so it's your choice." Naruto frowned but nodded. He moved back to the pot and scraped the last of the stew, loudly complaining about how he wished he had cooked more of it. When it finally came time to retire for the night, the air was thick with tension. Kushina was feeling a little awkward, but mostly because she had just met Naruto the day before. She felt a little bit of regret and missed opportunity passed through her when she didn't ask Minato, but he probably would have freaked out, and she was just too tired. Jiraiya was out of the question as she had known the man for years and he was certainly sure to make everything worse. Thankfully she didn't have a change of clothes so she wouldn't have to worry about Naruto walking in on her undressing. The kid was only 14, but she remembered her hormones raging at that age and well, it would have been weird. Instead she laid out Naruto's sleeping bag beside the one that Minato had graciously lent her. He'd be sharing Jiraiya's larger one instead. She was already in her bag when Naruto quietly and carefully unzipped the tent. When he saw she was already in her bag, relief washed across his face. He shrugged his shoes off and took his shirt off, earning a few eyeing of the various scars and bruises that ticked his skin. Scars were something unfamiliar to Naruto. Before he was thrown back in time, the only thing that had ever left a scar that hadn't healed itself within a few months was the pale swirl of where Sasuke's Chidori had impaled his right shoulder, complete with the matching exit hole on his back. In a way, Naruto was glad he still had the scar. That battle had been one of the more significant ones in his life and was a constant reminder of what he had to do to change what he could and hopefully save his best friend's life. After the Kyuubi had deserted his body, however, while his healing rate was still better than most people, it was pathetic compared to before. Many gashes and cuts ticked the blonde's body and the stitched wound on his side was sure to leave a wicked one. The blonde set his shirt down carefully and kneeled down. He glanced at Kushina and said timidly, "Sorry, I have to change this before I sleep on it. I'd rather not wake up with an infection caused by night sweat." Kushina nodded and said, "Do you need any help?" Naruto shook his head and smiled at her. He went about carefully peeling the bandage off to reveal an angry-looking wound before using a small piece of gauze to wipe it with alcohol. Kushina winced along with Naruto when he took the first wipe. Looking away, she came up with a way to hopefully distract him from the pain he was undoubtedly feeling. "So, Naruto-kun was it? Tell me about yourself. Jiraiya-sensei tells me you are Minato-kun's brother?" Naruto spared her a quick glance before grimacing and nodding. "Yeah, that's me. Namikaze Naruto. I'm 14, Genin, and Enai-san has been my teacher since I came out of the coma he found me in. Apparently someone thought it would be funny to beat the shit out of me and toss me in the playground a couple of years ago. I bet I was the source of excitement at the academy for weeks." Kushina grunted out a small laugh. The story was so horrible it was almost funny. "Did you have family? Other than Minato-kun?" Naruto shook his head. "Not really. Just some close friends. I'm still missing huge sections of my memory, but I haven't yet remembered anyone caring for me. I suppose I just assumed I was an orphan and lived as a street rat until I ended up here. Naruto paused to unwrap a piece of gauze. What about you? As far as I can remember, Anai-san's only mentioned you once in passing when I was like 12. Kushina felt miffed. She pursed her lips and said, Well, that rat bastard. My name is Uzumaki Kushina and I'm 19 years old. I was born in the Yuzushiogakure, but I was relocated to Konoha shortly before it fell. Naruto had paused. His head was down and looking at his wound, and he was pressing into his side hard enough to bring tears to his eyes. Of all things, he had not expected her to say that. Uzumaki, that was a name he hadn't heard anyone say in years. He hadn't actually expected to find someone with his last name. He wondered if they were from the same clan. Maybe he had finally found some long-lost family. Naruto-kun? Are you okay? Naruto looked up, his face schooled into a grimace. Yes, sorry, I got my finger caught on one of the stitches. Kushina sucked in a breath. Naruto finished putting the gauze on his stab wound and crawled into the sleeping bag. Kushina clicked the electric lamp off and laid out on her back, trying to find a comfortable position amidst her bruises. Kushina-san, can I ask you a personal question? Naruto asked quietly after a few minutes of silence. His brain had been ticking away and he just couldn't help it. He felt Kushina turn her head towards him. Shoot. Do you like my brother? Kushina was glad it was dark. Her face was as red as a tomato. When she didn't answer, Naruto felt a little shame to have offended her. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you or anything, he said quietly. Kushina didn't move or say anything for a good 10 seconds. No, it's okay. I just didn't expect that question. She was quiet again for a few minutes. Naruto had all but given up on her and his eyelids were starting to droop when she said in a voice that belonged to a mouse. Yeah, you know, I really do. Since the first time I was kidnapped when we were genin. He told me he really liked my hair as he carried me back to Konoha. I had hated it back then, but after that, well, Naruto was quiet for a long time before saying, Be patient. I'm definitely not the most observant of guys in the world, but it's damn obvious to me that he's definitely into you. He's never treated any of the other girls with this much attention. I think the only one who could compete for the attention he puts on you is me. Naruto paused, and through her shock Kushina could almost see the look of annoyance on his face. God, he's so friggin' overprotective. I think he considered asking me to stop being a ninja when he found out we were related. I could see it on his tongue. But man, nothing he does can compare to the first week after that. It was ridiculous. Kushina giggled and said, Okay. I can definitely see that. He was a bit of a worrywart when we were kids. But seriously now, kid, we have to get to sleep. I still have to talk to your brother about the mission that we were supposed to do together. Naruto's interest was piqued, but Kushina shut him down. He eventually gave up when he heard her breath even out. Sighing, he rolled over and eventually fell into a restless sleep. The one thought that had been repeating over and over in his mind was one that was going to haunt him for months. From everything he had drawn together, including Kushina's long-standing relationship with Minato, her clan name and where she was from, it explained many things. There was one thing that he was almost 100% sure of. Kushina was his mother, and she was a babe. He was so proud. Naruto opened his eyes and sighed. He hadn't gotten a very good night's sleep. The wound on his side made sitting up a very painful experience. But once he did manage to get up, he noticed that Kushina was missing. Her sleeping bag was rolled and tied up, so he wasn't worried. He tugged a simple black shirt over his blonde spikes, and after rolling his bag up, he exited the small tent. Dawn was streaking over the sky in vibrant pinks and blues. Everything was wet, testifying to Kushina's prediction of rain, and it was quite chilly. Minato, Jiraiya, and Kushina were all sitting around a small fire talking quietly. Minato noticed Naruto first and gave him a large smile. The younger blonde settled down between Kushina and Jiraiya and said, How long have you guys been up? Minato shrugged and said, Not long, don't worry. We just finished starting the fire. Kushina piped up and said, Sorry, you just look so tired, and I know you didn't sleep very well, so I thought you might enjoy an extra few minutes. Naruto gave her a small smile, but it was hard to make his lips move that way. Kushina's skin was more mottled black and blue than not, and every movement caused her to grimace. The way she ignored it, however, told Naruto that she would rather not talk about it, so he followed suit. Okay, well, now that everyone is here, we can discuss whether or not we are still able to complete this mission. Jiraiya's face was grim as he said this, causing Kushina to look down guiltily. Minato hesitated for a second before snaking his arm around her shoulders and giving her a reassuring squeeze. Kushina sighed quietly when he let his arm drop. What is the mission anyway? I still don't know. Minato shook his head at his brother and said, It's an infiltration mission, but that's all I can say until we decide on taking it or not. It's very sensitive. Naruto pouted, but didn't say anything else as Jiraiya continued. We have 4 from an original 7, but we may still be able to make this work. Kushina shook her head and said, Soma-san's abilities are lost. I'm not so sure we can. Minato wanted to grab her hand to reassure her, but he didn't want to intrude on her personal space. Come now, child, surely it might be even easier to play your role if you are by yourself. We already know that this man likes to be by himself. It makes for an easy target. The only ones whose job is going to be more difficult is us. We have to provide the distraction. Kushina shrugged and said, I guess. I know this is a critical mission, so if you think we can pull this off, Sensei, I will agree to do it. Minato hadn't said anything yet, but after a few glances at Naruto and Kushina he said, Will we be able to still pull this off if we are a few days later than the scheduled time? Naruto-kun and Kushina both need a bit more rest before we take on something this important, and have any hopes of completing it properly. Jiraiya nodded. I timed this originally to give us a month of leeway, and we are still on time, so we can take our time. Minato nodded and Jiraiya forced a small smile before saying, All right, it's decided. We are going ahead with this. Naruto was finally at the end of his ability to not talk and spoke up. Can I know what's going on? I can already tell by the seriousness of this that we are participating in an assassination. Minato lifted a brow and Jiraiya said, Ha! What an observant brat. Indeed we are, Naruto. The target is a member of the Tsuchikige's council. Naruto sucked in a breath. If this is ever traced back to Konoha, the results would be disastrous. Minato nodded in agreement. Very true, Minato said, which is why Konoha's best is on this team, despite the few members lost. Not many know it, but Kushina is ANBU's best assassin, and Jiraiya has a vast spy network that he single-handedly runs. I'm the escape cover, and you, Naruto-kun, were included in this partially because you are my brother, which provides us with a better cover, and because Hokage-sama has recognized your ability to improvise on the field. Naruto saw Kushina look at Minato with a glare of irritability when he revealed her position in ANBU. ANBU identities are supposed to be secret because they technically didn't exist. Well, what was our cover going to be before? The younger blonde asked carefully. Jiraiya shrugged, but Kushina answered this time. We were going to be a traveling caravan from Kiri, but we don't have enough people anymore, so I propose we use these next few resting days to think of a better one. Jiraiya rubbed his hands together and said, Oh my dear, I already have the perfect one. The look of horror on Minato's face as he even contemplated what his teacher could think of was enough to put Naruto into stitches. A few hours later found Naruto and Jiraiya lounging in a tree several kilometers away from the base camp. The weird and suspicious looks that the older man was giving Naruto were a little disconcerting, but in all honesty, Naruto missed him fiercely, and this was golden time on his part. They had just taken down a small deer and were in the process of cleaning it when Jiraiya said, Why did you look so surprised to see me when we first met? Naruto stopped what he was doing and looked up at the elder man. The question had come out of nowhere and surprised him. What? What do you mean surprised? That was all he could think to say in the few milliseconds he had to think. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes. Don't play stupid, boy. Naruto froze again, his heart pounding. That was the first time I had met you, but by the look in your eyes, that was not the first time you had met me. Naruto opened his mouth after a moment of shock to explain, but Jiraiya cut him off. Don't even try to say that you recognize me from pictures, because I know very well that pictures of living shinobi are few and far between, with most being kept a secret. The bingo book is mostly sketches for a reason. Naruto's jaw clicked shut. The damn old man outsmarted him again. Well? Jiraiya said impatiently. In his head he smirked. The boy was squirming and looking for an answer. Well, Anisen was your student, and he talked about you a lot. He also hinted that we might be doing a mission with you soon, and well, I'm a huge fan. Naruto's cheeks reddened when he said this. I don't know why you think I've seen you before, other than the bingo book sketch and the picture of you and your genin team that Anisen has, but you are pretty recognizable. He finished with an exuberant smile, hoping to change the atmosphere. Jiraiya kept his gaze firmly on the blonde's face for a full minute, looking for minute signs of lying before he too broke out in a grin. Ha ha, kid, okay. I believe you. For the most part. Naruto visibly relaxed, but tensed up again when he saw Jiraiya give him an extra look. It was a look that Naruto knew quite well. It generally meant that the Toad Sage believed him, but knew he was holding something back, and he intended to find out what. The rest of the cleaning process was done in silence as Naruto tried to form up solid backstories for any kind of question he thought he would get asked, and Jiraiya contemplated what the boy had said. They dragged the kill back to camp in mostly silence as well, only stopping to reapply dressings to a torn stitch on Naruto's side. Naruto wasn't sure if it was revenge, or just a way of picking on the boy, but Jiraiya called Minato over as soon as they reached camp and told him about the broken stitch, which caused Minato to hover frantically over his younger brother. Naruto quite verbally cursed Jiraiya, but only got the older man's cackle in response. They had decided that it would be best to stay for 5 days, or until Naruto's wound fully closed, whichever came first. Kushina's mottled skin had completely vanished by the second day, and her broken nose was completely healed shortly after that. Naruto's wound, much to Jiraiya's surprise, was almost completely covered in scar tissue by the third day, allowing them to move at a much faster pace. They reached a small town after a day's worth of traveling and with Jiraiya's instruction pilfered some ratty farmer's clothes. After they had donned them, Jiraiya sat them down and explained their cover. Okay, I have come up with the perfect cover that will suit us for. He rifled some torn-up passports from his bag. I had the toads fetch these from a friend of mine, he said as he handed one to each of them. Kushina opened hers and saw the fuzzy black and white photo beside her fake information. According to this, she was Watanabe Kaori. Leaning over, she saw Minato's passport claiming he was a Hisoto Makoto. Hisoto Naoki? What kind of a name is that? Jiraiya snorted. I pick names that would be easy to remember. Hisoto was my mother's family name, so I expect you to not dishonor it, please. He looked down at his own passport. The name he had been using on and off for various infiltration missions was Hisoto Rado. He had upped his age 10 years, however. All right, children. Minato and Naruto will continue to be brothers, and you will be my brats. Kushina, you'll be Minato's fiancé. Minato coughed, and both of them turned red at this. Also, Kushina-chan, I have something to ask of you that will be difficult, but it will enable us to leave after everything is done with minimal suspicion. Kushina narrowed her eyes. She had an awful feeling she knew what he was going to ask her to do. We are playing the roles of refugees from Kiri. It hasn't been made to the general public just yet, but any jounin worth his salt knows that there has been unrest about Kekai Genkai and Kiri. They've even started slaughtering clans because of it. While none of us have a bloodline, our neighbors did, which put us under light as sympathizers. However, Kushina's mother had specialized chakra that she passed down to Kushina, which explains the apparent usage that she shows. Despite not being a shinobi, it gives us another reason for leaving. We didn't want to take the chance that it would be mistaken as a bloodline. Kushina gave a very short nod. She wished that Jiraiya hadn't mentioned her chakra, but the best cover was a cover built on truths. I will be a retired ninja. I was injured in the Second Secret War and was honorably dismissed from active duty. I married a civilian girl whose family owned a small farm, and we lived there until she died of an illness 4 years ago. Although she didn't approve, I taught you too, my precious sons, basics in chakra control and taijutsu because I wished for you to be able to defend yourselves, or if you had ever intended to leave the farm to serve as ninja. Jiraiya swept a look over the small crowd of 3 and said, Everyone got that? They all nodded. Naruto was smiling excitedly. Naruto, what's your name? He asked quickly, and was pleased to hear the blonde say. Hisoto Naoki. Minato let his lips quirk up in a smile. Sensei, what about you? You don't look old enough to be my father, nor do you really look like either of us. Jiraiya grinned. You leave that to me. But first, I need to take Kushina into town to pick up some supplies. You two stay here. You need to dispose of anything shinobi related that can't be purchased by civilians except the weapons. We will sort through those when I get back. Naruto nodded and Kushina looked surprised. The town was small, but it was midday and the small market area bustled with activity. Kushina helped Jiraiya pick out some hair dyes that matched the boys, and he insisted that she buy a few trinkets to stash away to make it look as if they were really relocating in the event that their bags were stashed. Combs and a very old-looking necklaces, as well as a few nice-looking, but old plates and cups were carefully wrapped in cloth and placed into a bag. After a few hours, Kushina finally turned to Jiraiya and said, All right, what do I have to do? Jiraiya's face split into a devilish grin and Kushina sighed. We need to throw suspicion off of us, so I need to disguise you as being heavily pregnant. Kushina buried her face in her hands. No, you see, it's a really good distraction. Our story about wanting to raise the child in a better place with better protection will get us into the city better, and no one even registers pregnant women as threats. Minato's mother-henning tendencies will also come in handy. She looked up at Jiraiya with desperation lacing her violet eyes. Really? Do I really have to do this? Jiraiya nodded and she buried her face again. Just think, After you finish the mission, you can fake your death via childbirth. The three of us will depart claiming that we can't stand the place anymore, and I trust you will be able to get out of this city without being detected. I have several contacts that can help with this. It should be the easiest infiltration mission ever performed." Kushina groaned and Jiraiya lowered his voice. "I want you to be really careful though. I've come to think of you as my own, and not to mention it would kill Minato if anything happened to you." Kushina blushed, but she nodded. It was times like these that made her miss her parents. They had died very shortly after she had been born, and she had been passed around various relatives until she was about 6. After the Kyuubi had been sealed into her by her great-aunt Mido, she had been kept under constant watch for the next 3 years by the Sandame's wife until her chakra was deemed stable enough to not be a problem. When Kushina arrived back at the camp with Jiraiya later in the afternoon, she was surprised at how well the boys had cleaned up the area to look like nothing had been there at all. She tugged Jiraiya down to the river nearby to dye his hair, surprising both of the boys when they came back. With blonde hair, Jiraiya surprisingly looked like he could actually pull this off. White streaks left in his hair really added years to him. He wouldn't even need any extra touches to age him enough. Kushina, on the other hand, puzzled for the rest of the night how she was going to convincingly pull off looking like she was a full-term pregnant woman. She thought of a pillow, but they didn't have any, and when she tried shoving clothes under her shirt, it looked lumpy and unrealistic. Unfortunately for her, Naruto chose this time to climb into the tent. He froze when he saw what she was doing, and she gave a squeak that reminded him of a certain Hyuga girl. "It's not what it looks like," she said rather hurriedly. Naruto looked at her skeptically. "I don't know what this looks like in the first place," he said after a few moments. Kushina sunk down on her sleeping bag, the clothes still under her shirt. Her face was bright red through her hands, which she kept mashed against her cheeks. "Can I ask what you were doing? Or do I not want to know?" Kushina breathed heavily for a few seconds, trying to get her face back to normal coloring. "Jiraiya told me that the best way to get in and out with the least amount of suspicion would be to pretend I'm a weak and helpless pregnant woman." She explained everything that Jiraiya had told her that afternoon. When she finished, Naruto had his hand on his chin. "I can't get it to look realistic enough. I don't even know what a pregnant woman would look like." Naruto knew, although he didn't say. It was painful to think about still, after all of these years. He had an idea, however. "Do you know how to invert jutsu?" he asked, and Kushina shrugged. "I've never really tried. Are you thinking of inverting a henge?" "Sort of," Naruto replied. Kushina grimaced and tried to lecture him on how henge worked, and that it wouldn't be substantial, but Naruto held his hand up before she got carried away. "I said sort of. I taught myself henge when I was younger. It was easier to buy food when no one knew who you were." Naruto frowned curtly at the last few words, but continued. "I didn't find out until Enai-sen showed me that I had been doing it wrong the entire time. I had actually invented my own way of doing it, although it takes a lot of chakra." Kushina snorted. "I have a lot of chakra, so we won't have to worry about that." Naruto raised a brow and Kushina turned away. "Okay, well, what my version did was make a touchable version of henge. I'm still not sure how it works completely, but it's helped me get out of a few scrapes here and there." He didn't mention that he used to use to get back at the perverts of Konoha back when things were still good. "If you inverted it, you could add anything to your body, or change your body entirely, and to any but the absolute best of the shinobi, it would look natural. However, like I said before, it takes a massive amount of chakra. I have really high reserves, and the last time I used a full body one, it took almost all of it. I ended up spending 3 days in bed after it." He had been trying to escape his brother about a month after he came home with the news of their relation. He had transformed into a clothed version of his Oryoku jutsu and spent a day on the town, so to speak. "Like I said before, I have huge reserves. I can tell just by sitting here that I have at least twice the chakra you have, and that's until I get tired, not beaten." Naruto was taken back. He had a lot of chakra. Even now he was on par with Minato in terms of reserves, and since this body was only 14 years old, it was only going to grow. Something was nagging him about this entire thing. Why? A long time ago, Naruto learned that it was almost always easier to just ask outright than to snoop around and discover it for oneself. It might not have been as fun, but that was beside the point. "Why what?" Kushina asked, although she was racing for an answer in her mind. "Why do you have so much chakra? Is it a bloodline?" Kushina shrugged. "Kind of. I'm not really sure. I've always had it." Naruto narrowed his eyes. She was hiding something. It was probably the reason she had been kidnapped, but he would let it go. It was obviously something she didn't want to talk about. So the blonde shrugged and averted his gaze, and Kushina let out a tiny breath. Okay, well anyway, here are the hand signs. He flashed slowly through the hand signs. Once he felt that Kushina had gone through them enough, he said, to get the shape you need, it's very similar to henge, just think of the shape and cover it with skin. The hardest part about this jutsu is to give it a real look and feel by giving it a weight. Kushina nodded, mentally picturing, and blushing, over what she would look like. Okay, I'm ready to give it a try, I think. Naruto nodded and scooted back. Kushina stood on her knees, slowly went through the signs. Naruto felt his cackles rise as she applied a large amount of chakra to her hands. Her chakra felt weird and familiar at the same time. It was smooth, but he could feel it raging behind her control. When she said she had a lot, she wasn't lying. Kushina calmly called out the name of the jutsu, and when the small puff of smoke cleared, she unwound her hands and looked down. Running her hand over the bump on her belly, she sat back down on her heels. The thing on her stomach had weight for sure, and it felt extremely real. Wow! That looks pretty real. I don't think it's big enough for someone just about ready to pop, but we still have time to work on it. How does it feel? Kushina rubbed the protrusion and shrugged. I feel like a cow. Naruto burst out laughing. Minato, who was busy cleaning up the rest of the camp, swung his head towards the youngest two of the crowd's tent. He frowned, stamping down a twinge of jealousy he was feeling for his little brother. What he would do to be in Naruto's place right now, he would probably have eaten those words if he knew just what Kushina and Naruto were doing. Minato quickly realized what he was thinking and rubbed his hands on his face in an attempt to make his blush